We like to believe we live in a world where everything is normal. Horror movies are just movies. Urban legends are just legends. But there seems to be something underground in the wilds of California that might have you rethinking the way you see the world altogether. This story, titled The Things in the Ground, from a user by the name of Riveting33, shows us that true horror is real, and it's simply waiting deep under your feet, waiting for the right moment. I've been listening to your podcast for a few years now. I started during the lockdowns when I was working from home and needed something to fill the quiet. I burned through your whole back catalog in maybe 3 months, then started over from the beginning. I'm not sure what that says about me, but I heard your Alaskan tree god episode last week. Good stuff, by the way, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Not that I thought it was a lie or crazy, but the opposite. I believed every word of it, and that's what's been keeping me up. You see, I saw something too, back in 2012 when I was 17. Me and 4 friends out in the desert in Southern California. We were doing things we weren't supposed to be doing in places we weren't supposed to be. And something came up out of the ground and tried to kill us. Now, whatever it was, it definitely wasn't like the Alaskan tree god thing. But it was the same level of wrongness. That feeling of looking at something that should not exist. So I figured maybe it was time to write this down. Because who knows, maybe someone else will find this familiar and write their own story. And maybe we aren't the only ones who have encountered it. The name's Corey. I'm 28 now. I work as an electrician. But when I was 17, I saw something that I still can't explain. Here is what happened. During the summer of 2012, I was between junior and senior years, and I was absolutely convinced I would live forever. My best friend since 6th grade was a kid named Tyler Reese, and together we discovered the greatest hobby in the world: illegal night riding. I should explain what that means. Tyler's family had money. Technically not rich, but very comfortable. And for his 16th birthday, they bought him a Yamaha dirt bike. A beautiful machine, way nicer than anything I could afford. I had a beat-up Honda that I'd bought with 2 summers of lawn mowing money. And our friends Danny and Owen had these old ATVs they'd picked up secondhand. Clunkers, but they ran. The legal places to ride were boring. Designated trails with really low speed limits. Park rangers that would hassle you for everything you did. So we started to explore. Tyler would spend hours on Google Earth looking for spots, like dry lake beds or abandoned quarries. Some stretches of BLM land where nobody ever went. We'd load up his truck after dark, drive out to wherever he'd found, and ride until 2 or 3 in the morning. Was it illegal? Mostly, yeah. Trespassing, riding without permits, noise violations, probably a dozen other things we didn't even know about. Did we care? Not even a little. We were 17. We were invincible. And there's nothing like flying across the desert at night with the stars stretched out above you, your headlight cutting through the black in front of you, and the cold air hitting your face. It's the closest thing to freedom I've ever felt. There were 5 of us that night. Me and Tyler on our dirt bikes, Danny and Owen on the ATVs, and Tyler's girlfriend, Keely, who'd ride on the back of Tyler's bike, and somehow never complained about the dust or the cold or the hours of sitting on an uncomfortable seat. She was impressive. Keely really was something else. Most girls I knew back then would have wanted nothing to do with our stupid desert adventures. But Keely was different. She was practical and tough and didn't scare easy. She'd grown up on a ranch outside of Barstow and had probably seen more harsh country by the time she was 12 than most people do in their whole lives. Tyler was lucky to have her. We all knew it, including him. Danny was the type of guy who could not shut up if his life depended on it. The guy just couldn't help himself. It was just how he processed his thoughts. Out loud. Owen was an anxiety-ridden guy, always waiting for the worst things to happen. We gave him a hard time about it, the way friends do, but he was solid still, reliable. When things got serious, Owen was the guy you wanted watching your back, even if his confidence was lacking. Then there was me. I'm not sure how to describe myself. I was just a normal kid, I guess, nothing special. I liked riding and I liked my friends, and I loved the way the desert felt at night. That's about all I can say about me. The night I'm talking about was a Friday in late July. It was hot as heck during the day. Maybe 115, even 120 in the sun, but once the sun went down, it cooled off fast. By 9 o'clock, it was almost pleasant. By midnight, it'd be downright cold. That's the desert for you. Tyler had found a new spot, a dry lake bed about 40 minutes outside of town, surrounded by these low, rocky hills. He'd seen it on these satellite images and got all excited. It was flat, open, no obstacles, no trails, no one around for miles. Perfect. We loaded up around 8. 2 dirt bikes in the bed of Tyler's truck, the ATVs on a trailer behind, a cooler full of water and energy drinks, and of course helmets, goggles, gloves. We had done this enough times we had the routine down. The drive out was the usual mix of music and bullcrap. Danny had the aux cord and kept playing this terrible dubstep that nobody but him liked. Owen was quiet in the back seat, staring out the window. Keely was up front with Tyler, her feet on the dashboard, giving him directions even though he already knew where he was going. I remember feeling good, happy, being young, having friends, doing something you love. I didn't know it at the time, but that was probably the last night I would ever feel that way. Completely carefree, unaware that the world had things in it that could change you. We got to the lake bed around 9:30. We unloaded the bikes, the ATVs, and we geared up. The sun had been down for about an hour, and the sky was that deep purple color it gets before full dark. The stars were just starting to come out, and they looked great out here. "All right," Tyler said, pulling on his gloves. "Same rules as always. Stay in sight of each other. If you break down, kill your engine and wait, someone will come back for you. And if you see headlights that aren't ours, scatter and meet back at the truck." "Yes, Mom," Danny said. "I'm serious. I don't want to have to explain to someone's parents why their kid got arrested for trespassing on federal land." "Has that ever actually happened?" Keely asked. "No, and I want to keep it that way." We started riding. God, it was beautiful out there. The lake bed was perfectly flat, better than we had hoped, full of hard-packed dirt that was almost like pavement. You could open up the throttle and just go. Nothing in your way, nothing to worry about. The hills rose up around us like the walls of an arena, black shapes against stars. The only sounds were our engines and the wind. We raced each other across the lake bed, pulling stupid stunts, seeing who could get the most air off the little ridges and bumps. Danny almost wiped out, trying to do a donut, and ended up spinning in circles for about 30 seconds while we laughed at him. Owen, despite being the nervous one, turned out to be the best at wheelies. He could hold one for 100 yards without breaking a sweat. At around 10:30, I stopped to adjust my goggles. The strap had been digging into the back of my head, and I needed to loosen it. I killed my engine and sat there for a minute, enjoying the silence. And it was at that moment I felt something. The ground was vibrating. I was like, is this just me? Maybe some residual buzz from the bike, my body still humming from the ride? But it wasn't. There was something beneath me, something in the ground itself. There was a low, rhythmic thrumming, vibrating my feet, going up my legs and into my chest. I looked around. The others were still riding, their headlights sweeping across the lake bed. They hadn't noticed anything. Then Danny killed his engine. He'd stopped maybe 50 yards away to take a leak, and I saw him freeze, saw him look down at the ground. "Hey!" he shouted. "Do you guys feel that?" One by one, the others stopped. Tyler, then Keely, then Owen. The engines died, the headlights pointed in different directions, And in the sudden quiet, we could all feel it. Something was moving beneath us. "What the heck is that?" Owen asked, his voice higher than usual. "Underground base," Tyler said. "A military installation. They do tests out here all the time." "That's not a test," Keeley said. "That's something moving." She was right. It wasn't a constant vibration. There was a rhythm to it, like pulsing or footsteps, like something walking or crawling or burrowing. "Maybe it's an earthquake," Danny offered. "A little one, a tremor." "Tremors don't move," I said. Everyone looked at me. "I mean, it's moving, isn't it? Can you feel it getting closer?" We all went quiet and listened with our bodies. And yeah, whatever was making that vibration, it was definitely getting closer. The pulses were coming faster and stronger, coming towards us from somewhere to the west. "Get back on the bikes," Tyler said. "Now." We listened. I'd never heard Tyler sound like that before. Not scared, but urgent, and he didn't have time for discussion. We started our engines and the sound drowned out the vibration. And for a second I thought maybe we'd imagined the whole thing. But then, Keeley screamed. I whipped my head around and saw her pointing at something off to our left. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. The ground was moving, but not like an earthquake. There was a ridge forming in the dirt, a raised line of displaced earth, and it was traveling across the lake bed, like some sort of wave. It was fast, way too fast, and it was heading straight for Danny. "Danny, move!" Danny saw it then. His eyes went wide and he gunned his ATV, veering hard to the right. The ridge changed direction. It actually started to follow him. I watched, petrified, as Danny pushed his ATV as fast as it would go. But the ridge of earth closed the distance fast. 20 yards, 10 yards, 5. And then it stopped. Just stopped. That wave froze in place maybe 10 feet from Danny's ATV. The vibration ceased and everything went still. For about 3 seconds, nobody moved and nobody breathed. And then, the ground collapsed. It didn't happen where Danny was. It happened where the ridge had stopped. A section of earth about 6 feet wide just fell in on itself, like a trap door opening, like there'd been nothing underneath it. Dirt and rocks tumbled into shadows, and I heard this sound, this wet, grinding sound, like something retreating. I saw it. Just for a second, in the shadows of that hole, something pale, something that moved in a way that made my stomach twist up in these knots. It was pulling back, withdrawing into the earth. And then it was gone. "What the heck?" Danny whispered, then shouted, "What the heck was that?" "We're leaving," Tyler said. "We should go now. Everybody move." We turned our bikes toward where we'd left Tyler's truck and started to ride, fast, dangerously. We'd made it maybe a quarter mile when Owen's ATV died. The thing just stopped. The engine cut out and the lights went dark. We watched it coast to a halt. Owen was still on it, frantically trying to restart it, pressing the start button over and over. "Owen!" I screamed. "Just leave it! Leave it there!" He looked up at me, and then he looked down. The ground beneath his wheels was starting to vibrate. I'm not sure how he got off the ATV that fast. 1 second he was sitting there, the next he was running full speed toward Danny's ATV, with every gram of muscle in his body. Danny reached out and grabbed him by the arm, hauling him onto the back. And then we were all moving again. But behind us, I heard the ground open up. I looked back and saw Owen's ATV drop into the earth. It just disappeared, swallowed whole. the hole closing up behind it like some sort of mouth. And in the dust and the darkness, just for a second, I saw something pale rise up out of it, something with a lot of segments, something completely wrong. Then it was gone, pulled back into the ground, and we were racing across the lake bed with no idea where we were going. Just away. Out of there as fast as we could. Away from the thing that seemed to be hunting us. We rode blind for a long time. I don't mean that literally. We had our headlights, but we weren't navigating anymore. We were just fleeing, pointing our bikes away from where we'd been and opening the throttle, praying that whatever was beneath us could not keep up. It wasn't until Tyler finally slowed down and signaled for us to stop that I realized we had no idea where we were. The lake bed all looked the same, flat and featureless, the hills rising up in every direction, the sense of freedom gone, replaced by a sense of imprisonment. We'd come in from the southeast, parking the truck near a gap in the hills that Tyler had marked on his phone. But in the chaos of our escape, we'd gotten completely turned around. I couldn't tell which direction was which. The stars weren't helping. I'd never learned to navigate by the stars. And even if I had, I was too panicked to think clearly. "Where's the truck?" Danny asked. He was breathing hard, and Owen was still clinging to his back, arms wrapped around Danny's waist. "I don't know," Tyler said. "What do you mean you don't know?" "I mean I don't know, Danny. I was a little busy trying not to get swallowed by the freaking ground." Okay. Danny ran a hand through his hair. "Phones. Yeah, we check our phones. GPS." We all checked our pockets. I watched Danny's face fall as he pulled his out and tried to turn it on. "Of course it's dead," he said. "Forgot to charge it." Keely checked hers, pressed the button. Nothing. "Sorry. It was already at like 40% when we left, and I used it for the drive." Tyler's screen lit up. "Mine's good. 12%, but I've got no signal." Owen was the last to check. His hands were a trembling mess. He nearly dropped the phone twice. 34%, he said. "But no signal here either." "We need to get somewhere higher," Tyler said. "Those hills, we get up on those ridges, maybe we can get a bar, figure out where we are." Nobody had a better idea, so we started to move again, slower this time, heading toward the nearest hill. Our engines seemed impossibly loud now, and every few seconds my whole body would tense up as I mistook every new vibration as the ground possibly opening up beneath me. But it did vibrate, I think, twice during that ride. It was distant, far off to our left somewhere, and it wasn't coming any closer. Not yet. Whatever was down there, it seemed to be circling the edges of the lake bed. I'm not sure why. We made it to the base of the hill and killed our engines. The silence out there was nauseating. You could hear everything. The wind, insects, the sound of your breathing, and beneath it all, if you listened hard enough, there was the faint rhythmic pulse coming from somewhere underground. "We climb," Tyler said. "Leave the bikes here. They'll be fine." "And if they're not?" Danny asked. "Then we walk home. Would you rather be on it when it gets swallowed?" Danny shook his head slowly. "Then come on." The climb was brutal. The hill wasn't that tall, maybe 100 up to 150 feet, but the terrain was all loose rock and brush, and we had to make the trip in the dark. Danny twisted his ankle about halfway up, stepping wrong on a rock that shifted under his weight. I could tell he thought it was the thing for a second, underground. He half screamed, but after Owen caught him mid-fall, he realized it was nothing. "I'm fine," Danny said through gritted teeth. "It's fine, just keep going." Keely scraped her palms raw on a fall near the top, caught herself on a jagged piece of rock. I could see blood on her hands in the moonlight, dark and shiny. But she didn't complain. just wiped it on her jeans and kept climbing. We made it to the ridge around midnight. I remember checking my watch, an old digital Casio my dad had bought me, and I saw the numbers glow in the dark. 12:07 a.m. Below us, the lake bed stretched out like a pale scar in the moonlight. From here I could see our vehicles at the base of the hill, 3 motionless silhouettes clustered together. I could see the hole where Owen's ATV had gone down, a dark pit maybe 200 yards from where we'd originally stopped. And I could see the ground moving. But there were 3 now, 3 separate ridges crisscrossing the lake bed in long sweeping arcs. They moved like sharks circling a raft, never getting too close to each other, but never straying too far from our abandoned bikes. "Oh, Christ," Danny whispered. "There's more than one?" Owen said. His voice was barely audible. "There's more than one of them." Nobody responded. Tyler pulled out his phone after a while. The screen lit up his face, made him look pale and ghostly. "1 bar," he said. "Weak, but it's there." "Call your parents," Keeley said. Tyler dialed. We all watched, holding our breath. He put the phone to his ear and waited. His expression didn't change. "Crap, voicemail," he said. He tried again. Same result. "They're asleep. Phones are probably in the kitchen. They do that." "Try mine," Owen said, and gave Tyler the number. Same thing. Voicemail. "Okay, our parents are in bed. That's normal. That's fine. Just call 911. Owen looked at me. "And what are we gonna say, man? There's a monster chasing us?" "Not necessarily. We tell them we're stranded. We tell them something is stalking us, a wild animal. They'll send someone. They have to." "They're gonna think we're pranking them." "You got a better idea?" Owen didn't. He took his phone from Tyler and stared at it. I think he was trying to figure out what to say without sounding crazy. Then he dialed. I couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, but I could hear Owen's side, and that was enough. "Hi, yes, I need help. We're stranded in the desert, outside of..." He looked at Tyler, who mouthed a location. He told them, then said, "We're on BLM land, a dry lake bed surrounded by a bunch of hills." A pause. "No, we're not injured. Not yet, but there's something out here, an animal. It's been stalking us." Another pause. Longer this time. "I don't know what kind. It's big. It moves underground like I don't know, like a really big snake. Maybe, but it's not a snake. It's been chasing us." I watched Owen's face as the dispatcher asked questions he couldn't answer. I could imagine. What does it look like? I don't know. How big is it? I don't know. Big enough to swallow an ATV. Is it venomous? How would I know that? "She's giving me advice," Owen said to us, covering the phone. "For predatory animals, make noise, make yourself look big, don't run." Danny rolled his eyes. "Does she have advice for something that hunts from underground? If not, maybe she's got a nice chili recipe we could try out." Owen didn't respond. He went back to the dispatcher. "We're on a ridge, a hill overlooking the lake bed. No, I don't know the exact coordinates. We drove about 40 minutes from... Yes, we'll stay on the line." He stayed on the line. We all sat there on the ridge, watching the things below circle our vehicles, listening to Owen murmur responses to questions that we couldn't hear. Questions that probably didn't matter. The dispatcher was trying to help. I'm sure she was doing everything by the book, but the book didn't have a chapter on this. They're sending someone," Owen said. "A unit to search the area. She says we should stay where we are." "How long?" Tyler asked. She doesn't know. They have to figure out where we are first. Yeah, she says if we stay on the line, she should be able to..." His phone died mid-sentence. The screen just went dark. And that was it. Our last connection to the outside world. Gone. Owen stared at the dead phone in his hand. Then he slowly put it back in his pocket and didn't say anything. We sat on the ridge until almost 2 in the morning. We were all too tired, too scared to talk. We just watched the lake bed, watching those things circling, hoping to see headlights on the access road soon. A police cruiser, a search party, anything. But nothing came. Around 1:30, the ridges in the earth stopped moving. One by one they went still, sinking back into the ground. The lake bed looked normal again, just flat, empty dirt under the stars. "Maybe they left," Danny said. "Maybe they're sleeping," Keely said. "Do they sleep?" Nobody knew. Tyler stood up. He'd been sitting on a rock staring out at the desert, and something in his posture looked different. He looked like he'd made up his mind about something. "We can't stay here," he said. "We've got no water, no way to call for help anymore, and no guarantee the cops are even going to find us. We've got to start moving." "Where?" I asked. "There's a tree line north of here. I saw it on the drive in, a stretch of woods, maybe a creek feeding it. And beyond the trees, there's a town. I saw the lights." "How far?" 3 miles, maybe a little more." 3 miles across open desert, with those things somewhere beneath us. "We'll never make it," Owen said. "We might not make it if we stay here either." Tyler looked at each of us in turn. "I'm not saying it's a good plan. I'm saying it's the only plan we've got. We move fast, we stay together, and we hope whatever's down there is sleeping or hunting something else." Danny laughed then. It wasn't a funny laugh, more like the sound you make when you've run out of other options. "All right," he said. "Let's go get eaten in the woods instead of the desert. At least there'll be shade." We climbed down the far side of the hill, away from the lake bed. The ground here was even harder, and hopefully that might make a difference. I didn't know if that mattered, though. Didn't know anything about those creatures or what they could swim through. But it made me feel slightly better, putting my feet on what felt like solid rock. We walked single file. Tyler in front, then Keely, then Danny limping on his bad ankle, then Owen, then me bringing up the rear. We moved as quietly as we could, placing our feet carefully, trying not to make vibrations. The first mile passed okay. The desert was eerily still. It was a windless night, so dang quiet. The moon had risen higher, casting everything in silver light. I could see the tree line ahead, so close yet so far. I was starting to think we might actually make it when Danny stepped on the wrong patch of ground. It looked the same as everything else, hard-packed dirt and rock scattered across it. But when Danny put his weight on it, his legs sank to the knee. Soft earth, hidden beneath a thin crust like ice over a pond. "Crap," Danny said, and the ground started to vibrate. "Run!" I'm not sure who shouted it. Maybe Tyler, could have been me even, but it didn't matter, because we all ran. I've never moved like that in my life. My legs were pumping like an Olympic runner, but my lungs could barely keep up. They were on fire in moments, and I could feel the earth trembling beneath my feet with every step. The vibration was getting stronger, getting closer, and I knew without looking that something was coming behind us. Keely fell then. I saw her go down maybe 20 feet ahead of me. Her foot had caught on a rock, her body hitting the ground hard. Tyler was there in an instant, grabbing her arm, hauling her back up. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, but she didn't slow down. Owen tripped too. He went sprawling, and I grabbed the back of his shirt, pulling him forward, helping him to stay on his feet. I kept moving. I could hear something behind us now, not just vibration, but movement. A mighty force pushing the earth aside, pushing up from below. I told myself over and over, don't look back, don't look back. I couldn't do it even if I wanted to. I knew that if I did, I would slow down, and if I slowed down, I'd die. The tree line was only 50 yards, 40, 30, and then the ground behind me erupted. I felt dirt hit my back, felt the spray of rocks and soil, and I heard a sound unlike anything I'd heard before. A moist, grinding roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. 20 yards, 10. We hit the trees. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping my face and roots grabbing at my feet. I didn't stop though. I kept running, deeper into those woods, until my legs gave out and I collapsed against a tree trunk, gasping for air. The others were there too. Tyler and Keeley holding on to each other. Danny on his hands and knees, dry heaving. Owen was flat on his back, staring up at the canopy, his chest heaving. Behind us, at the edge of the woods, the rumbling stopped. I turned and looked back. Through the trees, I could see the desert we'd just crossed. The moonlight showed churned earth, a trail of destruction maybe 10 feet wide leading right up to the tree line. But it stopped right there. Whatever had been chasing us, it hadn't followed us into the woods. It can't. Danny was trying to catch his breath. It can't come in here. The trees, the roots, it can't burrow through. We're safe, Keeley said. She laughed, a high and shaky laugh. Oh my God, we're safe. Tyler didn't utter a word. He was still staring at the edge of the woods, unreadable. Come on, he finally said. The town's north of here, we gotta keep moving. We got up. It took a lot of effort. My whole body felt like it had been wrung out like a wet towel, but we got up. We started walking north, picking our way through the trees. It was harder to navigate in here, the moonlight filtering through the canopy in patches. But it was also quieter, calmer. The air smelled like pine trees and soil, wet soil. And for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe again. We'd been walking about 10 minutes when I heard something. Footsteps. It wasn't ours either. It was coming from something else, something heavy, crashing through the brush somewhere off to our left. I stopped. The others stopped too. What is that? Owen whispered. We listened. The footsteps were slow and uneven, not that steady gait of a walking animal, but like something stumbling along, something that wasn't used to moving that way. Maybe it's a deer, Danny said, or a bear. Do they have bears out here? That's no bear, Tyler said. The footsteps were getting closer, moving parallel to us, matching our pace. Whatever it was aware we were here. Then I saw it, through a gap in the trees, just for a second. A glimpse, but it was enough. Grayish white, pale, the color of something that had never seen sunlight. It was hunched over, about 7 feet tall when it was upright, but it wasn't upright. It was struggling, its limbs bent in ways that didn't look quite right, because they seemed to be designed for pushing, for burrowing, not for walking on the surface. Its body was segmented, kind of reminded me of a worm, but thicker, fatter, with limbs sprouting from the segments, 4 that I could see, maybe more. They ended in something like hands, but the fingers were too long and they curved inward like hooks. I didn't see its face. It then moved behind a tree and it was gone. Oh God, Keeley said. Oh God, it came out of the ground. It can walk, it can follow us. I was about to say she was wrong, that it had to be something else, but I'd seen enough of it to know that would be a lie. The thing from the desert was now in the woods with us. At least one of them was, and there was nowhere left to run. We all stopped moving, and we waited. We stood there in the dark, 5 terrified teenagers frozen between the trees, listening to the sound of something heavy moving through the woods, only about 30 yards away. The footsteps had stopped, but I could hear other sounds now. Cracking branches, undergrowth rustling, and a wet huffing noise that might have been breathing. "What do we do?" Owen's voice was barely audible. Tyler didn't say anything at first. He watched unblinkingly in the direction where we'd seen the thing. I could see him clenching his jaw over and over, and his hands were clenched into fists. I'd known Tyler since we were 11 years old, and this was the most fear I'd ever seen on him. He was truly and deeply scared. "We keep moving," he finally said, "north toward the town. We move quiet, but we move fast, and we don't stop for anything." "It's between us and the town," Keeley said. "Then we go around it." "And if there's more than one?" Tyler looked at her. In the dim light coming through the trees, I could see something pass between them, a silent communication that couples develop. "Then we deal with it when that happens," Tyler said. "But we can't stay here." He was right. Standing still was not an option. Whatever that thing was, it knew where we were. If we didn't move, it would eventually come to us. We started walking again, slower now, more careful. Tyler led us at an angle, veering east to put distance between us and where we'd seen the creature. The woods were thick here, lots of undergrowth, and every step seemed to make noise no matter how carefully we placed our feet. Danny was struggling. His twisted ankle had swollen up during our run from the desert, and now he could barely put weight on it. Owen and I took turns supporting him, one arm over our shoulders, helping him through the brush. It slowed us down, and I tried not to think about it too much. And the sounds, they followed us. Not constantly, there would be long stretches of silence where I'd start to hope we'd lost it. But then I'd hear it again, that heavy, uneven movement, somewhere off to our left, still parallel to our path. It was tracking us and keeping pace, and waiting for something. "Why isn't it attacking us?" Danny whispered during one of our brief stops. Even though it was so cold out, he was sweating. "If it wanted to kill us, it could have done it by now." "Maybe it's not sure," Keeley said. "Maybe it's never hunted above ground before. Maybe it doesn't know how." "Great. We're being stalked by a confused monster. That makes me feel so much better." "Shut up," Tyler said. "Both of you. Listen." We listened. The woods had gone quiet. The footsteps and rustling and breathing had all stopped. There was now only wind in the trees. No, there was a distant sound, something else. "Cars," Owen said. "I hear cars." He was right. Somewhere ahead of us, maybe half a mile, I could hear the hum of traffic on the road. And beyond that, if I squinted hard through the trees, I could see lights. Street lights, porch lights, the glow of a town. "We're close," Tyler said. "Come on, we're almost there." We pushed forward with renewed energy. Even Danny seemed to find some reserve of strength, hobbling faster, even though his ankle was in poor condition. The lights grew brighter through the trees. The sounds of cars grew louder. Civilization, safety. We were going to make it. We never saw it coming. The creature hit us from the right. 1 second we were walking. The next second, something massive crashed through the undergrowth and slammed into Tyler, sending him sprawling. Keeley screamed. Tyler hit the ground hard, rolling, and he came up swinging. But the thing was on top of him. I could see it now, really see it, and my brain couldn't process what it even was. It was truly pale, almost glowing in the dark kind of pale. Its skin was slick and glistening, like something that was never meant to see open air. The segments of its body pulsed and contracted as it moved, each one rippling independently, like the thing was made of dozens of smaller creatures fused together. Its limbs, I still counted 4, were nearly infinitely jointed, sickeningly flexing and bending. They ended in these thick hooked appendages. It was obviously designed for digging and for pulling things down into the dark. And its head, just a blunt mass at the front of its body, with a vertical split that opened and closed in a way that suggested a mouth. The slit was ringed with something that looked like teeth, but I don't think they were. They were moving like these rasping plates, like what you'd see on a lamprey, designed for grinding, for wearing away. That's what I saw in the half-second before Tyler kicked it in what I assumed was its head. From that angle, I didn't see its face. If it had one, that is. Only Tyler could see it. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about that. His boot connected with a wet thud against the creature's head, and the thing recoiled. I don't think it was hurt. It looked more surprised. It pulled back, limbs scrambling for purchase on the forest floor. Then Tyler was up and running before it could recover. "Go, go, go!" We ran. There was nothing else to do. Danny's ankle didn't matter anymore. The noise we made didn't matter either. We crashed through the woods like animals fleeing a forest fire. The creature came after us. I could hear its heavy, uneven gait, faster now, more confident. It was learning, adapting. Every second it spent above ground, it was getting better at moving through the environment. Then Owen went down. I saw him get his foot caught on something, and he pitched forward, arms pinwheeling. Then he was on the ground, and the creature was right there on top of him. I didn't think in that moment. I just acted. I grabbed a branch off the ground, some dead wood, maybe 3 feet long, and I swung it at the thing with everything I had. There was a thud. I felt the impact travel up my arms, and I felt the branch break and splinter. The creature made a sound, high-pitched, a sort of shriek, and it turned toward me. For one horrible second, I was face to face with it. That eyeless head, that grinding mouth, close enough that I could smell it. This rank mineral odor like wet clay and rotting meat. And now I was certain this thing just didn't have a face. Then Tyler was there, grabbing Owen, hauling him up. Danny was there too, throwing rocks, anything he could find. Keely was screaming at me to run. And so I ran. We burst out of the tree line, and suddenly there was open ground ahead of us. A grassy slope leading down to a road, streetlights, houses, a gas station with its lights still on. The town. We'd made it to the town. I risked a look back. The creature was at the edge of the woods. It had stopped there, its body partially hidden by the trees, that eyeless head turning back and forth like it was sensing us, or something else. Maybe the streetlights, or the sounds of cars and the presence of people. It didn't follow us into the open. I don't know why. Could have been the light or the hard pavement. Nothing to burrow into, nowhere to retreat. Maybe it just knew on some instinctual level that this was not its territory. Whatever the reason, it stayed at the tree line and watched us without eyes. Its mouth opened and closed repeatedly, grinding plates catching the distant light. Eventually it turned and disappeared back into the woods. We did not stop running until we reached the first building we could find. It was an apartment complex, 2 stories, maybe 20 units. One of those cheap stucco buildings you see all over Southern California. There was a light on in one of the ground floor units, and Tyler ran straight to the door, starting to pound on it. "Hello? Please, we need some help. Please open the door." For a terrible moment, I didn't think anyone would come. I thought maybe whoever lived there was going to ignore us, pretend they hadn't heard, and we'd be stuck out here in the open, with that thing still somewhere in the woods behind us, still unsure if it could follow us out. But then the door opened. A woman stood there in a bathrobe, maybe 45 or 50 years old. She had curlers in her hair and a cordless phone in her hand. She was looking at us like we were aliens who had just landed on her doorstep. Which in a way, I guess we were. "Please," Keely said. She was crying, tears cutting tracks through the dirt and blood on her face. "Please help us. Something's chasing us. We need to call the police." The woman looked at Keely, then at the rest of us. 5 filthy, bleeding, terrified teens standing on her welcome mat at 4 a.m. I'm not sure what she saw on our faces, but whatever it was enough. "Come on, get inside," she said. "All of you, right now." We went inside. Her name was Barbara. She had a husband who slept through the whole thing, snoring in the back bedroom, never even woke up, and a cat that hissed at us from under the couch. She set us down in her living room, brought water, and called 911 while we tried to stop shaking. I remember sitting on that couch, looking at Barbara's family photos on the wall, her normal furniture, her normal life, feeling like I'd stepped through a portal from another dimension. Just an hour ago, I'd been running for my life from some sort of real-life monster. Now I was sitting in some stranger's living room, drinking water from a glass with cartoon lemons on it, waiting for the police to arrive. The cops came about 20 minutes later. 2 of them, a man and a woman, both looking very tired and skeptical. They took our statements separately, asking us to describe what happened. I told them a version of the truth. We'd been night riding, I admitted that part, figured there was no point in lying about it, and something had chased us. An animal, some kind of predator. We'd gotten lost, ran through the woods, and ended up here. The female officer asked me what kind of animal. I said I didn't really know, but I did know it was big and fast. She wrote it down without comment. I could tell she didn't entirely believe my story, but I also could tell she wasn't going to push it. We were clearly traumatized, and it was clear something had happened. But the details didn't add up, and she knew it. They drove us home. All of us piled into the back of a patrol car, squeezed together like sardines, too exhausted to care about the discomfort. It was almost 6 a.m. by the time they dropped me off at my home. My parents were awake. They'd gotten a call from the police, and they were waiting on the porch when the cruiser pulled up. My mom hugged me so hard, I thought she might crack a rib. My dad just stood there looking at me. I'd seen that look before. Relief, and also plenty of anger mixed together. I told them the story I told the cops. An animal attack, we got lost, we made it to a town. And their reaction was similar. They didn't fully believe me. But also they were too happy to have me home to press for more details. I slept for 14 hours straight, and they let me. The next day, a search was conducted. They found Tyler's truck right where we'd left it, at the gap in the hills near the lake bed. The dirt bikes were still there, and the ATVs were recovered except for Owen's, which was never found. The official report said it had probably fallen into a sinkhole, which was not uncommon in that area. The holes in the lake bed were documented. 3 of them, the report said. Subsidence events caused by underground erosion, possibly an old aquifer that had collapsed. A natural phenomenon, nothing unusual. No animal was found. No tracks even. No evidence from out of the ordinary. Case closed, I guess. Our friends and I, after a few months' break, continued our nighttime hijinks, but we never went back or anywhere near that lake bed. We went to new, different places. Places we knew were safe. But a few months after that, well, something happened. It wasn't as major as the story I just told you, but I feel I should mention it. I was driving home from work, a late night shift, nearly midnight. I was on a stretch of highway that cuts through empty desert. Nothing around for miles, just sand and the occasional cactus. But my car, it started to vibrate. And it wasn't from the engine or the tires or the road. The whole car was shaking slightly, like I was driving over a series of small bumps, but different, deeper down. However, the road I was on was smooth. I could see it in my headlights, flat, perfect asphalt. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. Behind me, about 100 yards back, the ground was moving, a ridge of displaced earth traveling alongside the highway, keeping pace with my car. The trauma came back up. I floored it. I'm not sure how fast I went, 90, maybe even 100, fast enough that the steering wheel was shaking in my hands. One wrong move would have sent me spinning off the road. The ridge kept pace for about 30 seconds, then it veered off, disappearing into the darkness. It was gone. I didn't slow down until I was back in the city, but I didn't stop trembling then. I parked in my driveway, sitting in my car with the engine off, just trying to steady my breathing. I kept this event to myself because I didn't want to scare my friends. By then, the events of that night had become a distant enough memory that we could all almost claim it was just a shared nightmare. If I told them about this, it would make it real again. So I kept it private. Now, it's been 12 years, and I'll never forget about that lake bed. When I was a kid, I remember playing Lava Monster or Tremors, based on the movie with Kevin Bacon, where we would run and jump around on playground equipment or trees, and you could not touch the ground because the person who was it would get you. Now, I don't know about playing that game for real. I'm not too good at climbing anymore, or running for that matter. Good night. This has been Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails. For more scary stories like this, check out my podcast, Tales from the Break Room, on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. If you have a scary story to share, send it to me at darkstories.org. If you're listening on the podcast, this episode should release on Christmas Eve. In that case, Merry Christmas to you all. I hope you get everything you want, and you have a great, warm time. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer submission podcast, and I want to hear your scariest work story. So send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit, and if it ends up on the show, I'll pay you 5 cents per word via PayPal. Don't forget to follow and rate my new show, Camping Horrors, for more outdoorsy scares. Thanks.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Too bad I work in the coffee business. No chance of working from home here. What would I do? Mail people's macchiatos through the post office? Well, luckily for me, and unluckily for this guy, maybe working from home isn't all it's cracked up to be. You see, I heard a story recently about someone who worked from home, only to be harassed by something sinister way out in the middle of nowhere. Look at that, it's break time, and I've got plenty more true scary work stories to share. Join me and bring your croissant. These are Tales from the Break Room. Working from home horror. From J. Elliott. It's been over a year now since the bizarre incident that happened while I was working from home one day. I still get uneasy when I think back on it. At the time, my wife and I were living in an old farmhouse in rural Missouri that we had fixed up ourselves. It was on 20 acres of land out in the middle of nowhere. The closest neighbor was a mile down the road. I worked remotely as a software developer, while my wife worked in the city, about 40 minutes away. She was out of town for a business conference when all this went down. At the time, it was just me and our dogs, a pit bull and a German shepherd. It started out as a normal workday. I was sitting in my home office, which looks out onto our backyard through large windows. The dogs were taking a nap nearby as I typed away at my computer. It was a sunny fall day, leaves just starting to change colors. Everything was quiet and still. After I'd been working for a couple of hours, I heard the first unusual noise. It sounded like metal clanging outside. I paused and looked out the window, but nothing seemed amiss. The dogs perked up too at the noise, but then settled back down after a moment when it didn't repeat. I assumed something had fallen over in the shed, so I went back to work. Over the next hour or so, I kept hearing strange sounds outside the office. More clanging, some odd thumping noises, faint rustling in the fallen leaves. Every time I would stop to listen, but then there would be dead silence. No wind, no animals, and nothing to explain what I was hearing. I decided to take a quick break. I stepped out onto the back deck to get some fresh air. That's when I noticed one of the wooden chairs on the lawn and a rake were lying in the middle of the yard. Neither had been there earlier. I called the dogs out and we searched around the house together, but still we found nothing out of the ordinary. The noises had stopped, so I shrugged it off and went back to work. Another 30 minutes went by, and I started to hear the clanging and rustling again, this time louder and seemingly closer to the house. I was genuinely confused about what could be making that racket. Again, we didn't have any nearby neighbors. Strangest of all, the dogs were calm, just lying there, casually sniffing the air. I got up and looked outside again, walking the perimeter of the house. At the back corner of the property, I found some broken tree branches and divots in the dirt. It appeared as if something had trampled the ground recently. The back of my neck prickled as I realized these weren't just random noises. Something or someone was in fact lurking around the house, messing with things and scurrying off before I could spot it. I went back inside, this time locking all the doors before grabbing my revolver. I sat down, watching out the office windows, my gun in my lap. I felt stupid. Maybe I'm just paranoid, I thought. I mean, the dogs were still lounging around, oblivious to any strange goings-on. I listened hard, but everything was still silent. After 15 minutes with no activity, I was just thinking I should get back to work when I heard a loud crash. Something heavy smashed to the ground at the front of the house. I jumped up, running down the hallway, pistol raised. The dogs finally really reacted, barking and running toward the front door ahead of me. Looking through the front curtains, I could see our large clay planter had been knocked over. Dirt and flowers had been dumped on the front walkway. The wooden bench from the porch was now down in the yard. My heart raced. I unlocked the door, telling the dogs to stay back. With my gun out, I slowly circled the house. That's when I froze. At the corner of the house, the ground had been disturbed. Still fresh claw marks had dug into the dirt. They trailed off behind the house. And near those marks were 3 dark feathers, each as long as my hand. I gulped and turned to follow where they led. Making my way into the backyard, I could see more feathers and scratched up ground, heading toward the tree line. That stretch of woods beyond our lawn suddenly took on a sinister vibe. Every shadow seemed to move as I stared at the feathers scattered before it. My adrenaline was really pumping now. I shook my head, realizing I needed to get back inside and call someone about this. I sure as heck wasn't about to go into those woods alone. As I turned back toward the house, a freakishly loud screech rang out. It echoed and seemed to come from the sky and the trees at the same time. I'll never forget that sound, like metal grinding and twisting, with a shriek that shook through to my bones. The dogs whimpered and cowered behind me. I hurled myself back inside, slamming the door shut behind the dogs. I peeked through the curtains, expecting to see some creature emerge from the woods, but there was nothing. My hands were shaking as I dialed for the police. I didn't know who else to call. I can only imagine what I sounded like, trying to explain some disturbing things lurking outside my rural home. Dispatch said they would send a patrol car to check things out. In the meantime, I sat there, watching out the windows, with the dogs by my side. I felt completely helpless, jumping at every little sound while waiting for the cops. It took almost half an hour for the patrol car to finally show up. 2 officers searched the property while I showed them the strange disturbances and feathers. They drove a ways down the road to my neighbors and knocked on their door, but no one was home. In the end, the officers had no explanation for what had uprooted items and made that horrible screeching sound. They took the feathers as possible evidence and filed a report, but with no sighting of an actual creature or person, there wasn't much else they could do. They told me to call immediately if there were any more incidents. They left to respond to a car accident in town. I was a nervous wreck the rest of that day and night, barricading myself indoors. Eventually, I had to go pick my wife up from the airport the next day. We stayed at a hotel nearby overnight, which helped to calm my nerves before going back to our house. Even so, I would jump at the slightest noise outside, imagining that shriek splitting the air and what it may have come from. I still have no idea what was prowling around our home. Those massive feathers didn't belong to any local birds. I can hardly stand being there by myself these days. We would eventually put the house on the market, and I soon found a job in the city. I hate to think what might have happened if I'd gone into those woods. Crash Crawlies from Tetsuzanko. I bounced between a number of fast food positions when I was younger. As weird as it might seem, a certain luxury feel came to surround indoor playground workplaces, especially when you were used to Burger King, Wendy's, and A&W like I was. I don't necessarily regret working those jobs, but the constant on-your-feet demanding role of a line cook at such positions weren't and never could be much fun. Crash Crawlies is about as close as you can get to a proprietary single-location Chuck E. Cheese-style restaurant. Really, it's an even worse business model, because at least when I worked there a few years ago, our entire day-to-day general admissions weren't nearly as important for our income as the private parties were. We were able to upcharge parents a ridiculous amount to rent out the facility for a set number of hours, and so that's what made up the general weekend timetables. Unfortunately for me, I was on a full-time role, which means rather than managing a neat closed party for no more than 8 kids, I had to deal with the random public access drop-ins. It was during the summer, so unassuming parents who had no other place to take their little tykes now that school was out would bring them to our establishment. Duties for me during the active hours consisted of making concessions, managing the floor, and on occasion presenting birthday cakes, because we indeed had weekday parties. Of course, they were hosted while the location was open for public business, which leads me to another rule: negotiating lonely and otherwise bored kids away from parties they didn't belong to, before they were able to make a dent in the snacks and cakes and birthday gifts that didn't belong to them. It's easy to complain about children being messy and loud at a job like that, but like I said before, the relatively slow pace was comfortable in its own right. Dealing with customers wasn't the only angle of the job. I worked full-time hours. I was one of the lucky few who got to open up the establishment in the mornings. No, this didn't mean I had to wake up at ungodly hours. The restaurant itself and indoor playground only opened up as early as 10 o'clock, so I was good to just arrive at around 8:45. It was an identical schedule to my college at the time, and simultaneously a shorter commute, so it worked fine for me. Morning duties were alright. I was almost always the only employee there, up until our regular opening hours, so it served as a nice little bit of alone time before the loud and somewhat chaotic day began. I had over an hour to do no more than 25 minutes of tasks, which included powering on the breakers for all the arcade hardware, a cleaning once-over, and preparing the kitchen. Typically, the latter two were always well handled by the staff who had closed the night before. They would do meal prep and leave appropriate proportions in our fridges and ensure the place was spotless before their night ended. When I started my 6th week at the position, however, this changed. I entered the facility that morning to find it disarrayed in a very bizarre fashion. The place had a main lobby when you entered, with a counter on one side and a few seats on the other. At the center was an admission-only gate. Behind that were the concession areas. At the very far wall was the indoor playground. That day, when I entered, I could see plainly over the admission gate that a large number of chairs were moved from the usual position tucked under the tables and were arranged in a circle at the center of the admission-only space. This was weird. I couldn't have imagined what kind of patron would ever want to arrange seating like that, let alone a situation in which they'd be allowed to do it. There were exactly 5 chairs, all facing inwards in a circle. The space inside them, which the chairs looked towards, was no more than a meter or 2 in diameter. As I leaned over one of these chairs, I spotted what lay dead in the center, a small glittery object. I picked it up, examining it in my hands, only to find it was an earring, a plastic one, like a child's facsimile of one a woman might wear. I wasn't particularly mad about the situation. It only took a few minutes to bring the chairs back to where they belonged underneath the food tables, but I was definitely curious. Our organization back then used a WhatsApp group for communication, and so I sent a message asking what the deal was and why the chairs were left like that. It took maybe half an hour to get a reply. You really couldn't blame the closing shift for sleeping in. The message informed me that no one had any idea what I was talking about, that the place had been left in perfect condition, with the chairs where they should have been. I assumed they just had a lazy night and hadn't bothered to put the chairs back in their proper places. It still bugged me how they ended up like that in the first place, as the seating arrangement seemed rather purposeless. But I didn't push the issue. My day went on. Nothing else was out of place, and so I completed the rest of the morning duties with no other items of note. As I finished my day, the earring I'd found, which I had placed into our lost and found, was yet to be claimed. Guess that made sense. It was obviously quite cheap, and I doubted if a child was missing it, the parent would bother bringing them back to the location to claim it. They would probably just get another set. I arrived the following morning to find an annoying sight. The chairs were, yet again, out of place. This time the circle consisted of 6 chairs, not 5, though everything else was identical, with the chairs lining up in a circular shape. This time when I checked, the center was occupied by a small plastic replica earring, just like before. Before fixing everything, I took a photograph of the chairs, texting it to my group chat as evidence of what I was talking about, asking why they were like this. I bent down, grabbing the little piece of jewelry, and working my way to the lost and found just behind the admissions desk. As I opened up the drawer where we normally stored the small valuables in, I put the earring down and noticed it was identical to the one I'd found the day before. I then looked at both, noting that the only difference at all was the inversion of the symmetry, which meant they were the same set. This was even more curious. I placed the fake gems down together. I was going to text the chat again, when I realized I wasn't sure how to convey the strangeness of finding 2 matching earrings in a seemingly specific spot, back to back, in few enough words. So I decided not to even bother. Instead, I dwelled on it as I went about my other duties. It seemed the most logical that the closing crew was pulling some weird prank on me. But that still seemed off, because I hardly knew any of them. Besides, it took just as much work to move the chairs into their odd formation as it did to restore them to how they were supposed to be. So what was going on? I didn't come to learn anytime soon. Something a little bizarre did happen later that day, though. We had a large amount of kids that noon, irregular for a weekday. I think at peak there was a little over 10 groups present on the indoor playground. I remember slicing a pizza that I was about to serve when I spotted something going on that immediately provoked my curiosity. There was a man, older and bald, present in between the many tables we had set up for food. Immediately, I didn't recognize him as someone who had come in earlier. He had a sort of disheveled look about him, not super out of place, but still odd, as you could tell he was lacking personal grooming. He had the attention of a few of the kids, so I thought he was a parent as he spoke to them. The kids then moved back to their table, but bizarrely, each removed one of the chairs from underneath the table, carrying them back to the man. I left the pizza unattended to walk over and inform them they shouldn't be moving establishment chairs around. As I looked on, though, I noticed the children were all independently moving the chairs into the form of a circle. The man was instructing them where to place each one, pointing with his finger. When it dawned on me they were putting together the same array of chairs that had popped up the last 2 mornings, I felt my heart sink. I didn't know what to think at first, even though the implications seemed to suggest that the man was probably responsible for the previous circular layouts, which indicated he'd somehow been in the establishment after closing. After letting that fact register, I approached him, clearing my throat and asking them what they thought they were doing. He stared at me idly, not replying, as if waiting for me to say something else. So I did. I informed him that chairs aren't to be moved from the tables, before specifically asking him why he was making that bizarre circle. The area was already cramped anyways, considering how many kids were present and eating, giving my authoritative complaint all the more validity. He looked at me, tilting his head slightly for a reason I wasn't sure of, before informing me that he was sorry. He waved his hand, and the children all at once, who had been standing about in a half circle behind each chair, looked at me, before taking the chairs back to the tables they'd taken them from. The entire scene was very off-putting. The man seemed strange in a way I couldn't quite place, and the kids were, well, odd. Not so much in and of themselves, but because of the way they seemed to blatantly follow this strange man's orders. Anyway, away went the chairs back to their original spots. As I returned to cutting the pizza I'd been working on, I thought about how the way they'd set up the chairs nearly exactly matched what I'd found in the restaurant the past 2 mornings. I brought the pie over to the table that was waiting for it, before deciding I wanted to find the man I'd seen previously and ask him in more detail about what he was up to. I was planning to be more aggressive, to get a better answer this time. Whether or not I was going to accuse him of being responsible for the chair arrangement the nights previous, I wasn't sure yet. But it never came to fruition, as the man was now apparently gone. As I looked around, I noticed 3 of the kids were still present, so I went over to them, asking where their parent or guardian had gone. Just as I asked, an older woman came to the table. She asked if there was a problem, and I replied by saying I wanted to speak to the man who had been with the kids. She gave me a strange look, before telling me that the group had not come with any man. I went on to describe the guy I'd met, and she proceeded to inform me she had no idea who I was talking about. Alarm bells were ringing in my head, so I quickly apologized. Naturally, my attention instantly became less focused on the chair arrangement thing, and more on the fact that an unknown man was talking to a group of kids who he had no association with. Quickly, I notified my manager about the situation. She informed me to do a run-through of the indoor playground and eating area to see if I could locate him. I went and searched, but despite thoroughly checking every space an adult man could occupy over the course of a few minutes, I couldn't find him anywhere. Given the nature of our establishment, there's really not too many exits. The only door in and out, at least at the time I was employed there, besides the main entrance, were fire exits. They were all rigged with alarms that sounded when used. As the other staff were informed, however, including the person working front desk, they claimed they didn't see a man matching the description I gave, coming in or coming out. Despite the fast implementation of our safety policies, the man's actions really didn't warrant a response from law enforcement, so we didn't call. My manager informed me that she'd review the security tapes and ensure later day staff were aware of the man's appearance and to be on the lookout. We gifted a complimentary lunch package consisting of 2 pizzas and a few snacks, plus a rebate, to the lady responsible for those 3 kids to apologize for the commotion. The matter was far less than settled in my mind. The man had disappeared, cleanly and without a trace, and while apparently inconsequential, it was incredibly off-putting for me. Where had he gone? Was he really related to the bizarre formations of chairs that kept cropping up? I wasn't sure. The day wore on with little other issues, and I went home that evening. I got the notification of my boss describing the man's appearance in the WhatsApp group we shared, just before my shift ended. I was a bit relieved, knowing the evening crew could be on the lookout. The following day, before I even entered the building, I decided to peer in through the glass. I was anxious about the chairs being present in that creepy little circle again, and to my relief, the floor appeared exactly as organized as it should have been. Entering the establishment and flicking on the lights, I saw no circle of chairs, so I relaxed a bit. I didn't quite know what to think regarding causality and whatnot. I instead opted to enjoy the fact that everything was as it should be. My morning progressed smoothly for about half an hour. I remember doing a once-over of the indoor playground floor and noting everything was in place. At a certain point, though, the music I was listening to was interrupted by a loud and annoying creaking sound of wood. First, I assumed it had been outside, or possibly next door. Our building is integrated with other businesses, after all. But as I continued my duties, the sound persisted, permeating the space I was in. While it sounded relatively muffled, I was able to localize it over the next few minutes as a handful of creaks continued. It didn't take long to realize it was directly under me. Our location did have a basement, one I was familiar with from hearing my boss speak of it. In my tenure, I'd never had a reason to go down into it, as it primarily served as a place for us to store replacement furniture and indoor playground hardware, namely pads and netting. The playground was designed in a modular fashion, so if pieces were damaged, they could be refitted in place. But that was typically done on the night shift. Hearing the sound of movement and dragging items beneath me was a bit unnerving. However, something else to note about the basement was that it was shared with the organizations next door. At the time, we had soft plastic dividers up and a few metal cages to indicate what space belonged to who. I was uneasy, but even so, I decided to head downstairs, as I figured a contractor or a new employee might have been using the space allocated to us. So I went and got the key, proceeding to the entrance. The door to the basement was at the very back of the kitchen and was always kept locked, so on the off chance a kid or patron wandered back there, they'd be unable to access it. When I got to the door, I noticed, with a drop in my stomach, it was ajar. Either the last person to grab something from storage had forgotten to lock it, or someone else had opened it and was down there right now. Given the noises I heard, I was mentally leaning towards the latter. I began to cautiously walk my way down the steps. I could hear more of the same creaking I heard upstairs, only it was much louder now. About halfway down the staircase, I decided to call out to see who exactly was there. Clearing my throat, I asked anybody downstairs to identify themselves, but I got no response. Instead, seconds later, the lights to the basement went out. Keep in mind, these were industrial fluorescent overheads. They weren't meant to ever be off, and as far as I currently know, the only way to turn them off is by using the breaker. They didn't have a dedicated switch. Naturally, I panicked on the inside. Being halfway down a staircase leading to an unknown person or persons, only for them to cut off the light when they knew I was there. Not good signs. That was enough for me to make me turn around and run back up the stairs. I had a feeling they were no worker at any of the nearby businesses. So I decided to dial the police, informing them that there might be an intruder at my place of work, hiding out in our basement. I locked the doorway down from the outside, patiently waiting for the police to arrive. Notably, there were no more noises from downstairs. They came pretty fast. I unlocked the door for them and let them down. 2 officers inspected the place themselves. It took a while. Eventually, one of them came up and went back to the patrol car. A few minutes later, 2 other cop cars arrived. There were then a total of 5 officers going down into the basement. They weren't telling me anything concrete, but with the volume of police, I could only assume something pretty bad was down those stairs. After maybe 15 more minutes, I came to realize that wasn't the case. In fact, there was nothing of interest. Why 3 squad cars had come out was apparently due to the sheer size of the basement. They'd inspected the place extensively before informing me there was no intruder present, which I very much appreciated. Given how many businesses intersected that space, it seemed easy enough for somebody to have left without being caught, if they'd been down there when the officers showed. Following a modicum of paperwork, I informed my manager what had happened over a direct phone call. Really, I expected some scolding after I'd called emergency services for what seemed like no reason, but she was more or less understanding. If anything, she seemed to appreciate the security of the establishment seriously. So by then, the phone call was over and the police were gone. After finishing my morning duties, that bizarre incident in the basement staircase was itching at me. After a bit of deliberation, I decided to head back down into the space myself to take a look around. I don't really know why. I think I was probably trying to force myself into the creepiness so it would stop gnawing at me. I headed down. This time the lights didn't turn off. I soon got to the bottom of the staircase and looked around the space. It was mostly normal, dusty indoor playground assets. But then I saw it, plain as day under the overhead fluorescent and completely unsuspecting. 7 of our outdated legacy chairs. They were centered in the section space to the left of the stairs, all organized into a perfect circle. I approached hesitantly. I felt a horrible sensation at the pit of my stomach. This was far too much, far too freaky to be coincidental. Someone had been there, and they'd organized the chairs like this. I didn't think they were there now. The police were too thorough, but someone had done this. And naturally, I could only assume it was the person responsible for the previous arrangements, the one I now believed to be the strange man I'd seen earlier. The fact he had apparently escaped without a trace that day seemed to allude to the idea he had slipped into our basement of all places. I didn't end up touching that array of chairs, but I did remove the item that sat in the center. This time it was a small plastic hair clip. It was a bright magenta, and I could have easily assumed it belonged to the same child that the earrings did. I wish I could say something happened as I picked up the hair clip, but nothing did. The chairs remained unsuspecting, no movement, no sounds, just a heavy knot in my stomach that seemed to tighten as the item was removed. I headed upstairs, placing it in the lost and found drawer. There were still 10 minutes to go before I was to expect anyone else's arrival for the morning opening. And so I just kind of sat there and thought. Something just seemed bizarrely wrong about the entire thing. I remember proceeding about my day, almost like a zombie, trying to create some semblance of logical tracking in my mind to explain what happened. After that day, I ended up taking 2 sick days to finish out the week. I wasn't sure of it at the time, but this ended up turning into an extended hiatus, and eventually, I left the position after I found something similar at a McDonald's with a play place. The events may sound minor to some, but they really did distract me from functioning in that work environment, to the point where I felt a switch-up would be best. Now, I did inform my manager about this in a lengthy email that ironically never got a reply, but my theory was, I believe that strange, not-so-talkative man was responsible for the chair formations. I think he'd either been using the key or some other access door to stay overnight in the storage space, so he could move those chairs around. How, and more interestingly why, I cannot say. As for the ever-increasing size of the chair rings and the little kid accessories I'd find in the middle, I remain completely confused in what they were and what they symbolized. My partner, who I told this story to, seems adamant it was ritualistic in nature. But I don't know. I didn't end up staying in touch with anyone from that position, and I never found out if anything more came of it. Forest Ranger Danger from 33 Trader. It's been about 5 years now since the strange events that caused me to quit my job as Forest Ranger up in the Pacific Northwest. I'd been working seasonally for the Forest Service for a few years at that point. Most of the time, it was great. I loved spending so much time outdoors, exploring new trails and helping visitors. But the night that things went sideways was a night I'll never forget. I was stationed up near Mount Baker at the time. Our ranger station was a couple miles off the highway, nestled right up against the edge of the national forest. We'd get a pretty good flow of hikers and campers coming through during the summer. My job consisted of a mix between running the front desk, leading nature walks, enforcing rules, and generally keeping an eye on things. One night in late August, I was scheduled to take the midnight patrol shift. Basically, driving through campsites and along trails, making sure everything was quiet and there weren't any problems. I always liked the night patrols, cruising under the stars through the tall pines with a thermos of coffee. Besides the occasional rowdy group of teenagers, it was peaceful. When I headed out at midnight that night, it was clear skies and about 60 degrees out. Perfect weather for camping. I drove slow with my window down, listening to the sounds of the forest. About 45 minutes into my patrol, I was on a narrow dirt road, which runs between the south campsites and main hiking trail. This road has a few pull-offs, where you can park and access the trail, but it's mostly used by rangers and is gated off at night. As I approached one of the pull-offs around 1 a.m., I spotted a truck parked sideways across the road, completely blocking it. The headlights were still on, doors open, but no one was inside. I parked behind it and got out to take a look. No keys, no cell phone left behind. After checking the plates, it was registered to a man from Seattle who had a reservation for one of the nearby campsites. I was getting an odd feeling about the whole thing. I grabbed my flashlight and headed onto the nearby trail to make sure the driver had not gotten hurt. This trail leads uphill, with the forest getting pretty dense. I called out a few times, but didn't hear anything back. After about 10 minutes, I turned back, planning to radio another ranger for help. As I walked down the hill toward the road, that's when the beam of my flashlight landed on something at the edge of the trail. There was what looked to be a small pile of clothes lying on top of the underbrush. I leaned closer and realized it was a child, a young girl maybe 7 or 8 years old. She was lying on her side, eyes closed, wearing pajamas. She looked as if she was sleeping. I knelt down beside her, completely confused, trying to understand how a kid could be alone out here in the middle of the night. I reached out to gently shake her shoulder. That's when I froze. As my hand touched her, the girl's eyes shot open, but there was something wrong. Her eyes were entirely black. No iris, no whites, just a void. In that same instant, before I could react, the girl let out an inhuman shriek, piercing the silence of the forest. I scrambled back, blinded by my flashlight beam reflecting off her retinas. The scream lasted several seconds, reverberating through the trees. Then it cut off abruptly. When I looked up again, she was sitting up and staring right at me with those pure black eyes. Slowly, the girl stood up on the trail. She was tiny, couldn't have been more than 3.5 feet tall, but the look on her face was one of utter contempt, like the stare of an adult who utterly despises you. Then she spoke. The voice that came out sounded young, but also too articulate, too low-pitched for that of a child that age.
"This place is not for you,"
she said.
"Leave now."
I was absolutely paralyzed, looking into those empty voids where her eyes should have been. She blinked once, and when her eyelids opened again, her eyes were normal. This girl then turned and walked into the forest, quickly disappearing between the trees before I could say a word. I scrambled up, sprinting back down the trail to my truck, nearly twisting my ankle, stumbling over roots and rocks. I drove back down the road and radioed the situation in an absolute panic. The other ranger on duty thought I was playing some kind of prank at first, but he knew me well enough to hear the fear in my voice and know I was serious. I met him back at the ranger station. We went to the campsites of the truck owner I'd looked up. An older couple and their young granddaughter were staying there. They had no idea that the truck was gone, insisting they had locked it and had both sets of keys. The girl they had with them appeared totally normal. No signs of that entity I'd encountered on the trail. Still, I couldn't bring myself to fully explain what I'd seen. The other ranger and I searched the woods and kept watch on the campsite, but no other clues emerged. In the morning, the truck was still there where I'd found it. I quit working for the Forest Service about 2 weeks later. No matter how much I tried to put the event at the back of my mind, a new crawling fear took hold of me. Day or night, but especially after dark, a creeping feeling of dread and terror accompanied me on patrols. I just couldn't continue patrolling those woods alone after that. I had no interest in finding out what that thing was either. As long as it's a different area, I still go camping and hiking all the time. Whatever that presence was in the forest, I think it wanted me gone, and I'm not about to ignore that kind of warning. DoorDash Thing, from Darren M. It was about 3 years ago. I was delivering food in a rural area right outside of town. I still think back on it sometimes when I'm driving down a dark country road late at night. At the time, I was working for DoorDash to make some extra cash on top of my 9-to-5 office job. The money wasn't too bad for part-time work, and I enjoyed cruising around listening to podcasts. Most of the deliveries were to houses in suburban neighborhoods or apartment complexes, but every once in a while, I'd get an order going out to a more rural address. It was a Saturday night around 11 p.m. when I got pinged to pick up an order from a 24-hour diner that would be delivered to a house a good 15 miles away. It seemed really far, but I was pretty sure the delivery radius was decided by the restaurants or whatever, and the tip alone was $20, so I figured it was worth the drive. The trip would apparently take me down a winding country road outside of town that I was not familiar with. There was barely any moonlight as I turned off the main highway and headed down this pitch-black road. No streetlights either, just my headlights cutting through absolute darkness. The houses out there were few and far between. Mostly it was just fields, trees, and the occasional dirt road or driveway. I had been driving for about 10 minutes when the directions told me I still had 3 miles to go. The road hadn't passed any houses in quite a while. The woods were thick on either side, and I hadn't even seen another car for miles. I was just thinking I should turn on some upbeat music when I came around a bend and I had to slam on my brakes. Because there was something in the middle of the road. I glimpsed it for just a split second in my headlights. Sounds crazy, but it looked like a huge dog or wolf standing over some kind of carcass. But as the glare of my headlights lit it up, the creature's eyes shone back red. Then the thing turned and in a flash bounded into the woods on 2 legs in just about 2 leaps. My heart was absolutely pounding. I threw the car into reverse and sped backwards down the road to get the heck out of Dodge. Once I felt safely far enough away, I pulled over and turned the car around. I sat there, trying to slow my breathing, processing what I'd seen. That was no normal wolf, coyote, or dog. The thing was massive, almost the size of a person with hulking shoulders, and the way it turned to look at me was too deliberate, too intelligent. I debated canceling the order and heading home, but there was a house waiting for this food, and I didn't want to leave them hanging. So I continued the drive, far more cautiously than before. The last couple of miles, I was gripping the steering wheel tight, straining my eyes for any sign of that creature. Finally, I reached the small driveway leading off into the woods. I pulled up to the modest single-story home and knocked on the door. An older man answered, graciously accepting his food. He apologized for making me come all the way out there, as he handed me a nice cash tip. I made sure to ask him if he'd seen any strange animals lately. The man frowned and said he knew there were some coyotes and wolves out there, but they tended to keep their distance from people. Now, I was creeped out, and I felt like talking about it would help me deal with it. So I went ahead and told him what I saw on the way there. When I described it, his expression changed to concern. He suggested I report the sighting to animal control and be extra safe driving home. The entire way back, I was scanning the darkness, jumping at every hint of movement. I couldn't stop thinking about the creature's eyes reflecting the light, how unnatural and menacing it seemed. The image was burned into my mind. As soon as I got back into town, where there were streetlights and businesses, I pulled over and canceled my remaining orders for the night. My hands were still shaking a bit as I started driving home. I ended up calling out of my shift the next day. There was no way I could focus on office work. That made me realize I didn't get paid nearly enough by DoorDash to deal with deliveries on remote backroads in the pitch black. I decided to avoid orders that would take me too far out of town. I did contact animal control. They confirmed no other reports of a wolf or coyote that big. I still wonder what it was. And I'm also worried that it's still lurking out there along those rural roads. But it's not my problem anymore, because I'm not going to be driving out there anytime soon. There's always something watching. From Alex S. I have a couple of stories I can share relating to strange and creepy experiences that I've had at 2 separate jobs. My first story takes place during my last semester at the university I previously attended. I won't name the university itself, but you do need to know that it was on the smaller side, and it's a private diocesan university. There's a seminary on campus, along with a house for religious brothers, and I think there's a place for the nuns and sisters to stay. Every once in a while, you'd even see the nuns walking this big black dog around campus. There are several buildings on campus now, but the original building is still standing. I had the unpleasant experience of staying on a 4th-floor dorm in 2021, just a few months before the building itself turned 100 years old. There were always rumors that these dorms were haunted, but I hadn't believed them until my own experience changed my mind. These dorm rooms were single rooms, meaning no roommates, as the rooms were wildly small. And with it being almost 100 years old at the time, these were the original dorms to the school, meaning a lot of life, both good and bad, has gone through here. The stairs themselves had a curve in them from the years of foot traffic. I had been going through a rough patch at the time, and I'll be brutally honest. My headspace was nothing but depressing. If you know anything about spirits and the paranormal, it is believed that your negative energy makes you more vulnerable to them. However, I had decided to stick things out to see how the semester went before making any changes to my life. I busied myself with schoolwork and worked 2 jobs. One of my jobs was a work-study at campus safety, and the other being off campus at a convenience store down the road. Now, there weren't many of us staying on the 4th floor, so the hallway was usually dark. Thankfully, my room was right across from the toilets and showers, so that part was always illuminated by the lights. Due to my class schedule, I worked the closing shift at the convenience store, usually Friday through Saturday, meaning I wouldn't get back to my dorm until around 11:30 to 11:45 p.m. On those nights, the only light coming into the hall was that from the bathroom area, and the faint lights from the sidewalks outside. One particular night, after a seemingly long shift at the store, I made my way back to my dorm room, and I felt strange walking into my specific hallway down towards my room. I didn't think anything of this at first, chalking it up to my feelings of homesickness and loneliness. Before going to bed, I decided to take a shower to relax and brush off the stress of the day. When I left my room and before going across the hall, I looked down towards the opposite end of the hallway. I swore I saw someone standing and looking out the window. I didn't see a face or body, but a shadow. I blinked a few times and it was gone. I played it off as a trick of the light and my overworked mind. After my shower, when I walked back into my room, I looked down the hall again and still saw nothing, but I did feel an overwhelming sense of being watched. Later on, when I was getting ready to go to bed, I used the sink in my room, and the water went from clear to brown, then back to clear again in an instant. This wasn't the first time it happened. I just told myself it was old plumbing. However, a few weeks after the incident, I Googled the myths surrounding this old building, and I was a bit creeped out to find that bloody water was one of the more prominent myths. Fast forward a few weeks after this incident occurred. I was back home for fall break, and I couldn't have been more grateful to be back. My mental health had really taken a toll, and I was glad to have a break from my daily stressors back at school. One night, while spending time with my mom and sister, we got on the topic of my strange experience at the dorm. We decided to bring out the Ouija board, which isn't one of my proudest moments. My fellow paranormal and spiritual people will probably either cringe at my decision to partake in this, or be intrigued to hear about what happened. We believe we came into contact with what we were told was the spirit that I saw that night. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. From what this supposed spirit told us, he had been a student at the university, specifically a seminary student. Sadly, he told us that he had ended his own life, as his sexuality was discovered by his higher-ups, and he was to face the consequences of it. The spirit claimed that the university had covered up all information about his death, which would make sense considering they would want to keep that information sealed to protect their reputation. He claimed he knew and felt my loneliness and sadness and didn't want me to feel that way anymore. He also said I had to leave the university in order to get past these feelings. Whether or not this information was true, considering you never know who you're talking to on the other side of the board, I did end up leaving the university after finishing the semester, and it did greatly improve my mental health. I believe the spirit still watches over me from time to time as well, as I still have the key to the very room where I felt I'd hit rock bottom. I hope that one day they uncover more information that may solidify and validate this spirit's death. My next story takes place only a few months after leaving my university. I was taking a break from school and working at the same convenience store as before. I worked on the floor of the store, essentially meaning guest service. I encountered a lot of people during the day. One thing that was a big deal for us to do when interacting with guests was to make eye contact. I've never had an issue with this, and I found it to be a skill that comes easy to me. One day while working the front counter, I had a man come to my register. He seemed to be a businessman, dressed in a dark suit with his hair gelled to one side. A very clean-cut man. However, when I first said hello and made eye contact with him, there was something different about his eyes, something unsettling. They weren't piercing, but they were somehow a bright blue-gray tone, and his smile was extraordinarily white, with perfect teeth. Overall, his features just seemed too perfect to be real. I continued to make eye contact with him throughout our interaction, but every time he looked at me, it was as if he was looking through me or trying to look deep into my mind. I felt uncomfortable the whole time, and even for some time after interacting with the man. He would continue to come into the store every other day or so for about 2 weeks. Somehow he'd always end up at my register, even during our busy rushes. Each time he would flash this unsettling smile and greet me with a low, "Hello, Alex," as if he had known me personally. It wasn't strange for guests to call me by my name, as I did wear a name tag for my uniform. One day he said to me, "Tell me, Alex, are you religious?" And I proceeded to tell him that I didn't want to answer that question. I guess it wasn't weird for guests to hand us religious handouts or leave them in the store, but I've never been specifically asked about my own beliefs. He simply nodded his head and told me to have a good day, with this unsettling smirk. The very last day I interacted with him, he began with the same, "Hello, Alex," as he always did. At this point, I just wanted the interaction to go as quickly as possible. Well, it did go by quickly and smoothly, to my surprise, but that may have been my own personal unease, and due to the fact that he was becoming a regular visitor. It had gone on without any strange comments as well, which only made it all the more unsettling somehow. Just as he was about to leave, he turned back to me and proceeded to say, "There's always someone watching." He then pointed upward and was looking at what seemed to be right behind me. I was on edge for weeks about this last interaction, and likely should have taken it more seriously than I did. However, I don't believe he was referring to anything remotely human. Rather, he was referring to something that was out of this world. And part of me believes that he himself was not from this world. I get goosebumps typing this out. It's the first time I've ever told this experience. I haven't even shared it with my family. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eeriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at eeriecast.com. A new species of insect is discovered every 90 minutes. Did you know that? The insect kingdom dwarves our own. It's impossible to know what might lie underneath one rock or hide within a hollowed-out log, let alone what might awaken only once every several years. I received this creepy and very emotional story from someone named Locus Locale, which he has titled, "It Woke Up." In this story, we learn that in Missouri during the summer of 1998, allegedly some very bizarre killings occurred, which aligned perfectly with the awakening of cicadas. But it was not these insects who were behind it. Whatever it was, it wakes up every 17 years. If you're in Missouri in 2032, all I can say is you have been warned. Cicadas don't come out every year. They sleep underground for over a decade, then emerge all at once in what scientists call broods. Brood 4 woke up last month as of writing this. 17 years of silence, then suddenly they're everywhere again, screaming from every tree. This is what happened in Carthage, Missouri, in the summer of 1998. There were 5 of us: me, York Rager, Eric Navarro, Laramie Williams, and Marissa Delaney. We'd been friends since 3rd grade, when Laramie moved to town and got assigned the desk next to mine. By the summer before 8th grade, we were inseparable. Crazy how, when you're that young, friendship doesn't require maintenance or explanation. You just show up at someone's house, and you start hanging out, and nobody thinks anything of it. York was the one who got us into trouble, though. He was not the smartest kid in our group, not by a long shot, but he had a fearlessness to him that the rest of us lacked. He'd climb anything, jump off anything, and he would poke at anything with a stick. His mom called it bravery, and my mom called it a death wish. Either way, he was usually the first one through a door, and the rest of us followed, because someone had to make sure he didn't die. His house was the default hangout spot. His backyard was where we built the bike ramps, and his basement was where we watched movies on the big TV his dad had bought, but then never actually used. Eric was the biggest, almost as tall as York, but much broader. He looked like the kind of guy who should be playing football but wasn't interested. He was a quiet guy, and that made people underestimate him. He'd sit there while the rest of us talked, and you'd think he wasn't paying any attention, but then he'd say something that cut right to the heart of whatever we'd been circling around for 20 minutes. He was kind, too. Genuinely kind. He'd give you his last dollar and never mention it again. Laramie was like me. A dork, a shrimp. We were the 2 smallest kids in our grade, and we'd bonded over that shared indignity back when we first met. And he would laugh too loud when something really got to him. He read more than anyone I knew, mostly science fiction. I often saw him with these weird paperback books that had spaceships on the covers. I think he found most of them at garage sales, and he would devour them in a single afternoon. Marissa was the only girl, and she'd punch you if you made a big deal about it. She was a tomboy in the way she dressed and acted, wearing jeans and old t-shirts strictly, always racing with York to be the first one up a tree, or to catch a frog, or to be the first person to do something dumb. Whatever dumb thing we decided to do that day. And yet, there was something delicate about her too. She had smaller hands, and she would tuck her hair behind her ear when she thought. If you couldn't tell already, I had a crush on her, at least back then, and I never did tell anybody. I was the anxious little worrier in the group, the one who thought 3 steps ahead, constantly checking what time it was, when I needed to be back home for dinner. And it was me who owned the camcorder. Well, technically it was my dad's. A Sony Handycam he'd bought to film my sister's dance recitals, then forgot about it in the hall closet. I'd been, borrowing it, without asking, since April. We were making a movie, a horror movie. We were 13-year-olds, and that's what 13-year-old boys, plus 1 girl, make. Though we didn't have a script, no real plot, no real plan, we just had the camera and some vague idea that we'd figure it out as we went. The cicadas came up in late May. Brood 4 is what they said on the news. A periodical cicada emergence that happens every 17 years. I did not know what that meant back then, but I did think they were incredibly loud. You can't really describe the sound to someone who hasn't experienced it before. This isn't your regular nighttime bug noise. it's a big wall. A physical pressure against your eardrums that starts at dawn and doesn't stop until after dark. That summer it was so loud, you had to shout to have a conversation outside. You'd go to bed with the drone still ringing in your ears, and you'd wake up to it already full blast. After a few weeks, you stopped noticing it, mostly. It just became what the world sounded like. We spent that June filming test footage and goofing around with the camera. York would narrate everything in his fake deep voice that he thought sounded like a movie trailer. Laramie and I took turns being the cameraman. We shot at the abandoned gas station on Route 71, or in the woods behind the middle school. A couple times we shot in York's basement with the lights off, trying to make it look all spooky, like a haunted house. None of it was very good, but we didn't care. We were making a movie. It was cool. It ended up being York's idea to find a better location than these. I remember how he explained it. "We need something real," he said. We were sitting in his backyard, passing around a 2-liter of Mountain Dew. "Something that actually looks scary, not my grandma's basement." "Isn't it your basement, Goober?" Marissa said. "And your grandma's dead." "Whatever, same thing. We need somewhere creepy, somewhere with what do they call it? Atmosphere?" "Like where?" York shrugged. "My brother told me about this old farm out past the county road. Says it's been empty for years. Nobody lives there anymore." I looked at Eric, who was sitting against the fence with his arms crossed, quiet as usual. He'd been quiet all afternoon. You know anything about it?" I asked him. He turned to look at me, then turned away. "The Hensley place," he said. "That's what he's talking about. Past Sugar Creek, out toward the edge of the county. My mom said a family used to live there, but something happened. Didn't say what." York was already on his feet. "So let's go check it out. What else are we gonna do today?" That was York for you. Decision was made, the consequences unconsidered. Time to go. We biked out there that afternoon. It took almost an hour, longer than any of us had thought, and by the time we got close, we were sweaty and tired and starting to regret the whole idea. The road turned to gravel and then to dirt. That dirt road ran between fields that hadn't been planted in years, overgrown with weeds and wild grass that came up to our handlebars. The cicadas were louder out here. I remember thinking that. Away from town, away from cars and air conditioners, and all the other sounds of humans, the drone was overwhelming. It felt like being inside a big, grinding machine. The Hensley place sat at the end of the road. I wasn't sure what I'd been expecting. Something dramatic, maybe, like the haunted house at the end of the street that you see in movies. But this place, well, it just looked sad. A 2-story farmhouse with white paint peeling off in strips, and windows that stared out into nothing. There was a barn behind it that had partially collapsed, one wall leaning at an angle that made you nervous just looking at it. There was farm equipment scattered around the property, tractors and plows and things I didn't have names for, all of it rusted and overgrown. "Holy crap," York said. "This is perfect." He was right, though. It was perfect. The afternoon light came through the trees at an angle that made everything look golden and rotten at the same time. The tall grass moved in the breeze. The cicadas screamed. If you were going to film a horror movie, you couldn't ask for a better location. We spent an hour exploring, filming everything. York narrated in that fake deep voice again while I held the camera, describing the abandoned death farm and the ghosts that walked these cursed fields. Marissa found a rusted scythe, too, which had been leaning against the barn. She posed with it like the Grim Reaper, while Laramie made spooky noises off camera. Eric wandered the perimeter real slow, looking at things, of course not saying much. We were filming the barn when I spotted a man. He walked right out of the farmhouse without making a sound. One second the porch was empty, and the next he was standing there, and he was watching us. He was an older man, about 60 or more, with gray hair hanging past his ears, and clothes that looked like he'd been wearing them for weeks. He didn't yell at us or move towards us. He stood there with his hands at his sides and watched us. "Crap," York said. "Someone does live here." I think we should go." I was moving towards my bike. "Come on." We rode back to town faster than we'd come, pedaling so hard it looked like something was chasing us. It wasn't until we were back on paved roads that we slowed down enough to catch our breath. "That guy was creepy as hell," Laramie said. His glasses had fogged up from the exertion. He was wiping them on his shirt. "He didn't do anything. He just looked at us," Eric said. "Yeah, well, looking at us was creepy enough. Did you see his face?" I had seen his face. That was the thing I couldn't stop thinking about. That man had not looked angry that we were trespassing on his property. He hadn't looked confused or annoyed either. He looked worried, even scared. Like he wasn't concerned about us being there, but concerned for us being there. We should have stayed away after that. Any sensible group of kids would have found somewhere else to film their stupid movie. Forgotten all about the old man on the creepy farm, but we were 13, and the location was perfect. York had made up his mind. He was talking about going back there before we ever got home. And the more we talked about it, the more we were convinced ourselves that we'd overreacted. He was just some hermit who didn't like visitors. We'd be more careful next time. We'd avoid the house, stick to the barn and the fields, and he would never even know we were there. We went back 4 days later. There was no hermit outside when we arrived, so we left our bikes in the tall grass near the road and crept onto the property, like we were spies infiltrating enemy territory. The afternoon was hot and still. The cicadas were so loud, they were vibrating my bones, it felt like. We filmed for about an hour. I got some good shots of the barn interior, dusty light coming through holes in the roof, old hay bales rotting in the corners. Marissa did a monologue as the ghost of a farmer's daughter that was actually pretty good, her voice going soft and eerie. Even Laramie applauded her when she finished. York found a rusted pitchfork and insisted on being filmed holding it like a weapon. Normal stuff. Kid stuff. It was Eric who first noticed it. "He's boarding up his windows," he said. We were taking a break in the shade of an old oak tree, passing around a water bottle which had gotten warm in Laramie's backpack. Eric was looking toward the farmhouse, real focused-like. He didn't make that face often, but when he did, it was when something didn't seem quite right to him. I looked too, and he was right. The windows on the first floor of the farmhouse, which had been dark but visible on our first visit, were now covered with boards nailed haphazardly over them from the inside. You could see the fresh yellow of new lumber against the gray weathered siding. "So, maybe he's fixing the place up," York said. "You don't board up windows from the inside if you're just fixing a place up. You replace them, or you board them up from the outside so the boards are flush." Eric paused. "You board them from the inside if you're trying to keep something out." "Keep what out?" Eric didn't answer yet. He kept staring at that farmhouse. Marissa moved closer to me. I could smell her shampoo, and for a second I forgot about the farmhouse entirely. "This place gives me the creeps," she said quietly. "But don't tell York I said that." "I won't." We went back twice more over the next 2 weeks. Each time there were more changes, more boards on the windows, a trench dug behind the house that had not been there before, about 2 feet deep and 20 feet long, the dirt piled up beside it. The grass around the farmhouse had been cut short in a wide circle. It was like the man wanted clear sightlines in every direction. like he wanted to see something or someone coming. We stopped seeing him outside after that. But sometimes while we were filming, I would catch a glimpse of movement behind the gaps in the boarded windows, his shadow passing by, or his eye catching the light for just a second as he watched us. I was sure of it. He was watching and waiting and preparing, and I wasn't sure why. The other thing I noticed, the thing I didn't yet mention to the others, was the sound. You see, the cicadas near the Hensley place were beginning to sound different. There was something underneath the main drone, a lower frequency that you couldn't quite hear but could definitely feel. I guess I was the only one whose teeth ached from hearing it. It gave me a headache, but maybe it wasn't just me. All of us were growing more irritable and short-tempered. It didn't match the excitement we had when we filmed the movie. Sometimes we would snap at each other for no reason, then quickly apologize and forget about it, but then snap again 10 minutes later. And there was something else, a feeling I got when we were on that property, like being watched, but it had nothing to do with the old man in the farmhouse. It was bigger than that, older even. It's really hard to explain, but the feeling would hit me at random moments and I would freeze up with the camera in my hand and start rapidly scanning the tree line, looking for something that I didn't even know. After our third visit, I started to have dreams. Nothing I could describe clearly. Often I forgot what it was. But what I do remember were these dreams of darkness. I would see movement, and I would sense something large circling outside my field of vision. When I'd wake up, my heart would be pounding, and the cicada drone was already outside, and I would lie there until dawn trying to convince myself it was nothing at all. It wasn't nothing. I just didn't know it yet. I was still young enough to believe that bad feelings could be ignored, that nightmares didn't truly mean anything. To me, the world was basically safe. Nothing terrible could happen to a kid in a small town in Missouri in the summer of 1998. I was about to learn otherwise. The idea for a night shoot was York's. We were in the basement on a Thursday afternoon, watching the footage we'd collected so far. It wasn't bad, honestly. We had some genuinely creepy shots of the barn, and some pretty good acting from Marissa. Enough raw material to maybe edit into something that resembled a real movie. But there was something missing. The footage looked flat, like daytime flat. Nothing like the horror movies we were trying to imitate. "We have to go shoot at night," York said. "That's the problem here. Everything we've got looks like a home video because we're filming in the middle of the day. Real horror movies are shot at night. All the scary stuff happens in the dark." Laramie pushed his glasses up his nose. "How are we supposed to see anything? We don't have movie lights." "The camcorder has a night mode. That green stuff, like military footage. It'll look way creepier than this." I didn't love the idea. The Hensley place was unsettling enough in daylight. The thought of being out there after dark, with the boarded-up farmhouse and the watching hermit, and that low frequency underneath the cicadas, it made me nauseous. But York was jumping ahead, planning things. We would tell our parents we were sleeping at his house. Then we'd bike out after sunset, film for a few hours, then bike back before anyone knew we were gone. It would be an adventure, he said. It would make the movie actually good. And he wasn't wrong. Eric caught my eye across the basement. I could tell he had the same reservations I did. But neither of us spoke a word. That's how it worked with York. He charged ahead. We followed to make sure he did not die in some horrible way. We left around 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. The sun had been down for an hour, but the sky still held some light, a beautiful deep blue you get in late summer, when the days are longer and the darkness comes slow. We rode in single file down the county road, our bike lights cutting through the dark ahead. The cicadas were roaring in the fields around us. Marissa rode behind me. I was acutely aware of her presence, and I could hear her bike tires on the gravel. By the time we reached the Hensley property, the sky had gone fully black. There was no moon that night, just a sliver of one hidden behind clouds. Now the farmhouse was just a dark shape under the stars, lightless, those boarded windows invisible in the dark. The barn was creepy. It was just a void where the stars weren't, a black mass that seemed to absorb all light. "This was a mistake," I said. "Don't be a baby." York jumped off his bike, pulling the camcorder out of my backpack where I'd been carrying it. "Could you turn on the night vision? We'll just get some footage and get out of here." I powered on the camera and switched it to night mode. The world turned green and grainy through the viewfinder, shapes emerging from the dark in a flat and ghostly way. There was the barn, the tall grass, Laramie making a face at the lens. We filmed for maybe an hour, creeping around the property and whispering commentary, constantly trying to scare each other. And for a while, it was actually fun. The fear I'd felt on the ride faded into something more like excitement, a jittery energy. We weren't supposed to be here this late, and there was some adrenaline to that, you know. York kept wandering too far ahead and having to be called back. Laramie and I stuck close together, the two shrimps watching each other's backs. Marissa wasn't scared, or if she was, she didn't want to show it. While Eric moved through the dark like he belonged there, silent and watchful. I was filming the tree line behind the barn, and suddenly, the cicada sound changed. At first, it was a normal wall of noise, the steady droning we'd been hearing all summer long. But this shift, it was like a frequency drop. The low hum I'd been feeling underneath the main sound became the main sound itself, and it wasn't a hum anymore. It was like a pulsing rhythm, and I swear every time it pulsed, my muscles would flex on their own, like they do when you flinch at something. I stopped moving then. I tried to lower the camera, but couldn't bring myself to do it. I tried to turn my head, but I couldn't. My muscles were seizing up, and I was frozen there, the viewfinder pressed to my eye, staring at the green-tinged tree line while my heart slammed against my ribcage. In my peripheral vision, I could see the others. They were frozen too. York had his flashlight raised, and his mouth was open like he was about to say something. Marissa was reaching toward my arm, her hand stopped mid-motion. Laramie was mid-step, 1 foot off the ground, balanced impossibly like a statue. And there was Eric, standing like a stone, only his eyes moving. He seemed to be tracking something. Only my camera moved. My finger was still on the record button, and the tape was still rolling, capturing whatever was about to happen. Something moved at the edge of the trees. I saw it in the viewfinder, a shape separating from the shadows. Tall, at least 7 feet, if not more. It had these angular, long limbs, and it moved through the tall grass without making any sound, without even disturbing the stalks, like it was drifting instead of walking. It was heading towards the farmhouse. The front door opened. The old man stepped out onto the porch. He was carrying something in his arms, some bundled-up thing wrapped in cloth, and he walked down the steps into the yard with stiff movements. He was terrified, but acted as if he had no choice in the matter. I wanted to scream at him to run. I wanted to close my eyes, but I could do no such things. The man walked maybe 30 feet from the house, then stopped. He set the bundle on the ground. It took me a moment to see what it was in the darkness, It glistened, though. It was meat. Raw meat, dark and wet. Maybe a whole animal's worth. But why? The shape in the grass changed direction. It had been moving toward the house, but it suddenly curved directly toward the man, toward his offering. The cicadas pulsed louder. The frequency made my head feel like it was going to burst. The man himself stood very still. I could see him murmuring something, his mouth moving, but I could not hear anything over the cicada noise. To me, it looked like he was either praying or pleading. Perhaps it was the same word, over and over again. The shape reached him. I saw it clearly, for just a second, when the moon passed through a gap in the clouds, and I caught it in the faint light. Limbs like a mantis, too many joints, a body that was almost human-shaped but distorted, and a head that had turned toward the man with movement that was sudden, precise, and mechanical. The man tried to run, but he got only 2 steps. What happened next took maybe 15 seconds. The shape unfolded around him. Those long limbs wrapped around the man's body and lifted him off the ground. Then it started to pull. Not tear, but pull, like it was disassembling him along seams. The man, he came apart in pieces, and each piece came apart somewhere into that mass of angles and joints. There was no blood or spray, but there was the wet sound of separation, and the man getting smaller and smaller until there was nothing left of him at all. When it was over, the shape stood in the grass where the man was. The ground underneath was now dark and wet, so there had been blood. The offering of meat, though, sat untouched a few feet away. The cicadas shifted back to their normal frequency. My body unlocked. I stumbled backward, dropping the camera, and I fell on my rear in the grass. Somewhere nearby, York was making a sound that wasn't quite crying, but wasn't yet screaming. Laramie was running toward the bikes. Eric grabbed my arm and hauled me to my feet. "Move," he said, his voice steady but his hand trembling. "If we don't move, we die," he told me. Marissa was now beside me, her face pale. She didn't say a word. She grabbed my other arm and pulled. Together, we ran, grabbing our bikes, and we pedaled harder than I'd ever pedaled in my life, down the dirt road, onto the gravel, then onto pavement. We did not stop until we made it to the edge of town. By then, my lungs burned and my legs were jelly. My mind was somewhere else entirely, stuck on repeat, watching the shape reach the man over and over again. We ended up in York's backyard, collapsing on the grass behind his house. All of us were breathing hard and couldn't speak, but the cicadas were still going. They had not changed in town. Here, it was just the normal summer drone, the same sound we'd been hearing for weeks, and somehow that was comforting. It was like here, nothing had happened. Everything was fine. "What the hell?" Laramie kept saying. His glasses were crooked, but he didn't seem to care. "What the hell? What the hell?" "We have to tell someone," York said. His voice sounded like it was going to go hoarse. "We need to call the cops." York shut the hell up. It was Eric. He was sitting with his knees pulled to his chest, staring straight ahead. "If you call the cops, the blame isn't going to go to some monster you tell them about. They're not going to believe us. It's going to go to us, the group of trespassing teenagers. But we have it on video. The camera was recording, right? York looked at me. You got it on video, didn't you? I realized then I didn't have the camcorder. I had dropped it when I fell. It was still out there, somewhere in the grass near the barn, probably recording nothing until the battery died. I dropped it, I said. I dropped it, and we left it. Marissa put her hand on my shoulder. I don't think she meant anything by it, probably just a gesture of comfort. But I felt it like electricity. Even in that moment, even with everything that had just happened, I noticed her touch. Nobody said anything for a while. We lay there in the dark behind York's house, listening to the cicadas, trying to understand or come to terms with everything. I kept expecting to wake up, that this was a dream, and I'd be in my bed with the morning light coming through the window and none of this would be real. But that moment didn't come. We moved into, then stayed in York's treehouse until dawn. We didn't sleep. We kept watch and listened. When the sun came up, we went inside and told his mom we'd been up late watching movies. She made us pancakes and didn't ask any questions. This could have been a normal, memorable morning. A good day in a normal world. 2 days later, I went back for the camera. I had to. My dad was going to notice it was missing eventually, and I could not think of any way to explain losing it without being severely punished. So I biked out there alone in the middle of the day, my hands a shaky mess the entire time. The Hensley property looked the same. The farmhouse, the barn, and all that rusted equipment. There was no sign of what happened. No body even. The blood was gone. No dark spot in the grass where the man had been standing. Just the empty farm and the cicada noise under a hot July sun. I found the camera in the grass near the barn where I'd dropped it. The battery was dead. I took it home and charged it and watched the footage with my finger hovering over the eject button, ready to stop the tape if it showed anything that I did not want to remember. It didn't. The night vision footage was blurry and green, mostly useless. You could make out the shapes of trees or the outline of the barn. There were glimpses of the others moving around. You could see me stumbling backward then fall. Then you could hear us running, our footsteps and our breathing, and Laramie saying "what the hell" over and over as we fled toward the bikes. But the thing itself, anything of importance really, wasn't shown. The movement I thought I caught of that thing emerging, it was all glitchy or blurry appearing now, either the result of dropping it or the device getting covered in morning dew, but probably both. The only evidence that anything had happened was the audio. I captured the pulse underneath the cicada drone, undeniably. Without a word, I put the tape in a box in my closet and tried to forget it existed. We were kids who witnessed something they shouldn't have, so we didn't feel like talking about it. Not directly, not to each other. Whenever we were together, which wasn't often in the week following, we would make eye contact but look away. Were we ashamed of something? Were we the ones in the wrong by witnessing what we'd witnessed? I kept expecting someone to find a body, to raise an alarm. But no one did. That old man had been living alone on that property for years. No family checking on him, no mail carrier wondering why he wasn't picking up his packages. The man was just gone, and the world absorbed his absence without flinching. 2 weeks later, after the night at the Hensley place, York showed up at my house unannounced. The guy looked tired and thinner than I remembered, even though it had only been about 14 days. He stood on my porch with his hands in his pockets, and asked if I wanted to ride bikes with him. We ended up at the park near the elementary school, sitting on the swings, not swinging, not even looking at each other. The cicadas droned on. Somewhere nearby, some younger kids were playing on the jungle gym, shouting and laughing. Eventually, York said to me, "Man, I can't stop seeing it. Every time I close my eyes, it's just there." I know what you mean. Eric thinks we should just forget about it and move on. Pretend it never happened or something. Can we even do that? York shook his head slowly. I don't think so, but I don't know what else to do. I didn't either. We sat there on the swings for a while longer, listening to the cicadas and watching those younger kids as they played. Again, such a normal view, a normal moment. But underneath it, always, the knowledge of what we'd seen. What was out there in the dark at the edge of town? Had it been there all along, waiting for something? Maybe it's gone, York said. Maybe it was just there for him, for that family, or I don't know. Maybe that now he's dead, it'll leave. I wanted to believe that, and I told him that I did. But I didn't believe it, and I doubt he did either. Here's the thing about being 13 years old. You can see something that rewrites your entire understanding of the world. Something that could shatter you into pieces. And 3 weeks later, you're eating pizza and arguing about whether the Chicago Bulls could beat the Utah Jazz in a rematch. The human capacity for compartmentalization is strongest when you're young. The brain hasn't fully hardened yet. It can still flex around the impossible and keep functioning. By the first week of August, we were hanging out again. It happened gradually. York called me to see if I wanted to bike to the gas station for slushies. I said sure. We ran into Eric on the way and he tagged along. Laramie was sitting on his porch when we passed by, reading one of his sci-fi paperbacks, and York asked if he wanted to come. After a moment of hesitation, he did. And Marissa caught up with us on her bike near the edge of town, appearing out of nowhere the way she usually did. Just like that, 5 kids on bikes, same as it used to be, riding through the summer heat. But we still didn't talk about the Hensley place. It was forbidden as a topic. Though we didn't declare it, it was an unspoken agreement, a sealed subject, locked away so we didn't have to look or think about it. And that was fine with us. That was what we needed to do to move on, to go back to normal. And that camcorder, it sat in my closet for another week before Marissa asked about it. "Guys, we should finish the movie," she said. We were in York's basement, sprawled across the furniture, watching a rerun of The Simpsons. "We got all that footage. It seems stupid to waste it." The thought of watching that footage, though, put a sort of pain in my stomach. But Marissa wasn't talking about the night shoot. She meant everything else, the daytime stuff, the scenes we'd filmed before everything went wrong. "Honestly, I don't want to do horror anymore," I admitted. "So we do something else, a comedy like a fake TV show or something," Marissa set up, warming to the idea. "We make fun of local access or do stupid commercials, whatever. It'll be funny. It'll be something we can actually show to people." York was nodding along. Eric hadn't spoken yet, but he wasn't objecting either. Laramie was already grinning, his brain clearly spinning with ideas, and I realized, looking at them, that we all needed this. We had to replace what that camcorder had meant to us. We needed to use it for something good, something light, that could overwrite the memories of green-tinged night vision and shapes in the grass. "Okay," I said. "Okay, but I get final cut." The next 3 weeks were some of the best times of my life. I know how that sounds given everything that happened, but it's true. We threw ourselves into the new project with an energy that bordered on manic, filming every day, sometimes twice a day, generating hours of footage that was stupid and brilliant, and exactly what we needed. York created a character called Chuck Brubaker, a weatherman for a fake local station who was clearly losing his mind. He wasn't a natural actor, but that was part of what made it funny. Every segment he'd get a little more unhinged, predicting increasingly impossible weather events with this earnest intensity that made it impossible not to laugh. Tomorrow we're looking at partly cloudy skies with a high of 72, followed by the collapse of linear time itself. Back to you, Diane. Laramie and I did fake commercials together. Our masterpiece was a spot for a product called Beef Drink, which was exactly what it sounded like. Laramie played it completely straight, adjusting his glasses and talking about the refreshing taste and convenient packaging while holding a glass of what was actually chocolate milk mixed with food coloring. I was the skeptical customer who got converted. Marissa laughed so hard during filming that we had to do 8 takes. We filmed everywhere. York's backyard, the parking lot behind the grocery store, the elementary school playground after hours. Marissa did woman on the street interviews where she'd approach strangers and ask them absurd questions with complete sincerity. Most people thought we were weird. A few played along. One old woman gave a 5-minute answer to the question, "If you could be any type of cheese, which cheese would you be?" And we used every second of it. Eric was behind the camera for a lot of it. He had a good buy, better than mine honestly, and he seemed happier observing than being filmed. Sometimes I'd catch him smiling at something one of us did, a quiet smile that made his whole face soften up. He didn't talk a lot, but when he did, it mattered. The swimming hole became our regular spot that August. It was a wide bend in the creek, about a mile outside of town, with a rope swing hanging from a big oak tree and a rocky beach where you could set up towels. We'd bike out there in the afternoon heat, spending hours jumping off the swing and filming each other's dives. We'd float in the cool water while the cicadas screamed in the trees around us. One afternoon, we filmed a fake nature documentary. Eric was the narrator, doing his best David Attenborough, while York played a rare species of idiot in his natural habitat. "Here we observe the North American idiot," Eric narrated, as York pretended to drink from the creek like an animal, engaging in its primary survival behavior. York then broke character and splashed Eric. It devolved into a water fight, and none of us could breathe from laughing. Marissa sat next to me on the rocks during one of those water fights, both of us drying off in the sun while the others wrestled in the shallows. Her hair was wet and slicked back, and she looked different somehow. Older, I think. I wanted to say something to her, something that mattered, but I couldn't think of what. So I just sat there, aware of the inch of space between her arm and mine, feeling like that inch was the most important distance in the world. Those are the memories I try to focus on now. The ones I replay when I can't sleep at night. Just 5 kids in the water. The sun on our shoulders. The whole summer stretched out ahead of us, like it would never end. We had a sleepover at my house mid-August. Marissa couldn't come, because her parents wouldn't let her sleep over with a bunch of boys, which was probably fair. But the 4 of us stayed up until 4 in the morning watching movies, working through a stack of rentals from the video store. The Truman Show, which had just come out on video, Men in Black if I recall, and I'm sure that we watched half of Starship Troopers before we got bored and switched to something else. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, the conversation got really philosophical. We were on the floor of my living room, surrounded by empty chip bags and soda cans. The TV was playing the menu screen of whatever movie we'd just finished, but I can't remember which. "Do you think we're real?" Laramie asked. He was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling, his glasses folded on his chest. "Like, really real? Or do you think we live in a simulation like Truman? Truman wasn't a simulation, York said. It was a TV show. He was a real person in a fake place. Same difference. How would you know if your whole life was fake? You wouldn't, Eric said. He was sitting by the couch, arms folded, that thoughtful look on his face. That's the whole point. If the simulation is good enough, there's no way to tell from inside. That's terrifying, guys, I said. Is it? Eric shrugged. I don't know. If you can't tell the difference, does the difference matter? Your experiences are still your experiences. The people you care about are still real to you. But then they're not actually real. What does actually real mean, even? It's not like you can get outside your own perception to check. We stayed on that topic for almost an hour, going in circles, getting nowhere, but enjoying the conversation for its own sake. That's what being 13 was like for us. You could spend half the night debating questions that philosophers have argued for centuries and feel like you were discovering something new. Every thought felt fresh, every idea worth exploring. I remember looking around the room at some point during that conversation. York gestured while making a point that didn't quite make sense, while Laramie pushed his glasses up and launched into some theory he'd read in one of his books. Eric listened, waiting for his turn to speak. These were my best friends in the world, the people who understood me better than anyone else. I had no idea it was one of the last times we'd all be together like that. We fell asleep on the floor around dawn, and woke up in the early afternoon with stiff necks and bad breath, a vague sense that we'd figured out something important, but couldn't even remember it. The last week of August arrived faster than any of us expected. Suddenly, summer was almost over. School started in 10 days, then 8 days, then 5. The air had that late summer quality. It was still hot, but with an edge to it, a hint of the fall waiting just around the corner. The cicadas were still loud, but they'd peaked sometime in mid-August, and now they were starting to thin out, that drone losing some of its intensity. It was, of course, York who proposed the campout on a Tuesday. We were sitting in his backyard, not doing much of anything, and he brought it up. "One last thing before school starts," he said. "A proper send-off. We camp out in the back field and build a fire and stay up all night. Film the final episode of the show." The back field was the big open space behind York's house, about 10 acres of grass and wildflowers that ran down to a creek and a line of trees. His family owned it, but didn't do anything with it. We'd played there hundreds of times over the years. It felt safe. It felt like it was our place. "I'm in," Marissa said immediately. "Yeah, okay, sounds fun," I said. Laramie, though, was quiet for a second, but then he nodded and pushed his glasses up. "Sure, one last adventure." We picked Friday night. We set up tents and built a fire. We roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, filming the big finale of our fake TV show. Our parents all said yes. It was innocent enough. Just kids being kids, squeezing the last drops out of summer before real life started again. None of us talked about why we were staying close to York's house. None of us mentioned that the back field was the opposite direction from the Hensley place, as far from those overgrown fields and that empty farmhouse as we could get without leaving town entirely. We didn't have to say it. We all understood. Friday came. It was clear and warm. We hauled our gear out to the field around 6. 3 tents and sleeping bags and a cooler full of food and soda. York's dad helped us dig a fire pit, showing us how to stack the wood properly. Then he left us alone with a reminder to put the fire out completely before going to bed. We got the tent set up and the fire going just as the stars started coming out. The sky was huge out there, away from the streetlights, and you could see the Milky Way smeared across it like someone had spilled something beautiful. The cicadas were singing, but it was just the normal sound, the background noise of summer we'd been hearing for months. Nothing wrong at all. I set up the camcorder on a rock near the fire pit, angling it to catch all 5 of us in frame. We were going to film the final broadcast of our fake TV show. York had written a whole script for Chuck Brubaker's last weather report, increasingly unhinged predictions that ended with him announcing his retirement to become one with the storms. We did 3 takes. The first one fell apart because Laramie couldn't stop laughing. The second one was pretty good, but York forgot his lines near the end. But the third one was perfect. All of us playing our parts, building to a ridiculous climax, where Chuck Brubaker walked off into the field with his arms raised while the rest of us did fake crying. After that, we just hung out. Hot dogs, marshmallows, talking about nothing important, anxious about school starting up again soon. Which teachers we hoped to get. Marissa mentioned she was thinking about trying out for the volleyball team, and York said she'd make it easy. "You're the most coordinated person I know," he said. And Marissa rolled her eyes, but I could tell she was pleased. "What about you?" she asked me. "Any big plans for 8th grade?" I shrugged. "Survive, I guess." "Inspiring," Laramie said. Everybody laughed. I remember the firelight on their faces, the smell of wood smoke and those beef franks, the sound of Laramie laughing at something York said. A real laugh, too loud, the kind of laugh that made you laugh just hearing it. Everything felt right and safe. Marissa was sitting next to me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. At one point, she leaned over and whispered, "This was a good idea. The campout, I mean. I'm glad we did this." "Yeah, me too," I said. Around midnight, we did ghost stories for the camera. That had been York's idea, a way to get more footage. But we made a rule that nothing could be actually scary. Everything had to be stupid. So Laramie told a story about a ghost who haunted a specific toilet at Denny's, getting way into the details. I did one about a vampire who was allergic to blood and survived on tomato juice. Eric, deadpan and serious, delivered a 5-minute saga about a mummy who wasn't actually undead, just a guy who'd gotten wrapped up in toilet paper and couldn't get out. The laughter went on. The fire was starting to get low, and the night was almost quiet, save for the cicadas. Around 2 a.m., Laramie stood up. "I gotta pee, guys," he said. "I'll be right back." He walked toward the tree line at the edge of the field, about 50 yards from where we sat. I watched him go without really thinking about it, just tracking his silhouette as it moved through the tall grass, getting smaller in the darkness. He looked so small out there. I mean, he was small. The two of us both were. He reached the edge of the trees and stopped. I assumed he was finding a good spot with some privacy. And that's when the cicadas changed. I knew immediately. The sound shifted and dropped. It became that pulse I'd heard at the Hensley place, the frequency that vibrated your skeleton, the one that meant something was coming. My body locked up. I couldn't move or speak or do anything but stare at Laramie's silhouette at the edge of the trees. Beside me, my friends had gone rigid too. I could see York at the very far side of my eye, frozen mid-reach for another marshmallow. I could feel Marissa's hand on my arm, gripping tight, but neither of us could move. Laramie turned around. I saw his face catch the faint glow from our dying firelight. He looked so confused, so very scared. His glasses reflected the fire, and he opened his mouth to say something, but I never figured out what it was, because something came out of the trees behind him. I couldn't see it clearly. It was too dark and too fast, and my eyes wouldn't focus on it properly. But there was an impression of height and wrong angles and limbs that bent too much. The same thing we'd seen at the Hinsley place. The same shape that had taken the old man apart while we watched. It reached for Laramie. He didn't even scream. I don't really know if that makes it better. There was one quick, surprised sound. Then the shape folded around him and pulled him backward into the trees. There was a rustling, a cracking of branches. Then nothing at all. The cicadas shifted back to normal then. My body unlocked. I was on my feet before I knew I was moving, running toward that tree line and screaming Laramie's name. The others were on my tail. We crashed into the trees with flashlights, sweeping the beams everywhere, calling our friend's name over and over. There was nothing there. No sign of him. Just dark woods and cicada noise. We searched until dawn, covering every inch of those woods down to the creek and along its banks, through the brush and into the neighboring fields. But we found nothing. York's parents called the police when we came back at sunrise, stumbling and hoarse, unable to explain what happened. We told them Laramie had gone to use the bathroom and never came back, that we had searched desperately all night. But we could not tell them about what we saw. The search went on for weeks. Police, volunteers, dogs, helicopters. They checked the creek for signs of drowning. They checked the roads for signs of abduction. They interviewed everyone we knew and plenty of people we didn't. And they interviewed each of us at least a dozen times. A theory was settled on, that Laramie had wandered off into the dark, gotten disoriented, and fell into the creek. His body had likely swept downstream and would probably never be recovered. A tragic accident. A senseless loss. A memorial service was held at the end of September. The entire town showed up. Laramie's parents sat in the front row and looked like people whose insides had been scooped out of them. His mom kept touching his school picture, the one they'd put on an easel next to the podium, as if she was trying to make sure this was real. I sat in the back with the others. We didn't talk. We didn't even look at each other. We sat there and listened to people say nice things about Laramie, about how he read more than anyone and laughed too loud. I kept the camcorder footage from that night. I'm not sure why I even did. The tape shows the fire and the ghost stories. Laramie doing his bit about the Denny's toilet ghost. You can see him in the background of some shots laughing and pushing his glasses up, looking happy and alive. But the last shot is blurry, and it's of him saying something about needing to pee. He walks out of frame, and the camera keeps recording the fire for another 40 minutes until the battery dies. You can hear us searching on the audio, calling his name, getting more desperate, more panicked. As the minutes pass and he doesn't answer, you can hear York start to cry around the 20-minute mark, and you can hear Marissa saying, "This isn't happening," over and over, like a prayer. But you can't hear what took him. I listened to it hundreds of times probably, trying to find some evidence that what I remember was real. But there's nothing there. Nothing but normal cicada noise. That was enough to destroy our friendships. There was no fight or falling out or anything. but we became objects of our own trauma. Looking at York or Eric or Marissa just reminded me of Laramie and that thing in the woods. York's family moved away the next year. Eric went quiet, and we lost touch entirely before graduation. Marissa and I almost stayed friends. We tried, but every time we were together, there was an absence between us. Probably the space where Laramie should have been. And eventually it was easier to just stop trying. I left Missouri the day after I graduated high school, and I've never been back. I went to college in Oregon and got a job. I'm married now, and I built a life as far from Carthage as I could get. I don't talk about the summer of '98. I left the tapes with my family a long time ago. I've spent 17 years trying to forget what happened. Most days I almost manage it. But I'm writing this in 2015, and Brood 4 emerged again last month. The first time in 17 years. And I can't stop thinking about Laramie. I never got to say goodbye. None of us did. He was there and gone so fast. Wherever he is now. Whatever happened to him after that shape pulled him into the dark. God, I hope it was quick. I hope he didn't suffer. I hope whatever he saw at the end wasn't as terrible as what I've imagined every night for 17 years. During my school years, I only acquired a single friend I could call a best friend, and it was well into my later days. I can't imagine the pain one might feel to see one of the closest friends in the world be ripped away from them by something that should be impossible. Good night. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. Get to know me personally on X at Dark Prevails, or on my show, Night Watchers, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcast app, or just search YouTube for Night Watchers. But if you want more scary story narrations from me, check out Tales from the Break Room or Alone in the Woods. Until next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. What happens when you're sent to hunt the unhuntable? Something that toys with you the entire time and could quickly end your life at any moment it pleases. According to this story, sent to me by Stay Out of the Woods, titled My Most Disturbing Experience in Predator Control, you will hear one of the most chilling and close-up accounts of a creature that should not exist that I might have ever heard. Allegedly, almost 3 years ago in Utah, a retired wildlife control officer is hired to hunt a creature tormenting ranchers and slaughtering their cattle. But he instead stumbles upon something that should not exist. And it's still out there. At the tail end of 2023, Harlan Durfee called me about something killing his cattle. I hadn't spoken to Harlan in 15 years. His father and mine had worked cattle together, back when that part of Utah still had cattle worth working, and Harlan had taken over the family operation outside Farron after the old man died. By all accounts, he'd kept it running through drought and recession and everything else that kills a ranch. He was not a man who asked for help.
3 in 2 weeks, he said. I need someone who knows what they're looking at.
Well, call Fish and Game.
I'm calling you.
Harlan, I haven't worked a case in over a year. I'm retired. I'm 60 miles away and I've got no authority to...
Fish and Game means paperwork. Permits means some 25-year-old with a degree telling me I can't run cattle on my own lease because there's a protected species in the area.
He paused, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. I could tell just from the sound of him he'd been working since dawn.
I need this handled quiet. and I need someone who won't call me crazy when I show them what I found.
Knowing what I know now, I probably should have said no. Whatever was killing his cattle was the state's problem now anyway, not mine. But Harlan Durfee was not a man who spooked easily. I had known his type my whole career with wildlife services. Ranchers who had seen everything the land could offer, and dealt with it the same their fathers and grandfathers had. If Harlan was calling me instead of the state, something had rattled him badly enough to swallow his pride. All right, Harlan, I'll be there tomorrow, I told him. Don't touch anything else until I get a good look. I left Grand Junction at 5 in the morning, and I pulled into Harlan's driveway a little after 8. The sun was up, but the air still had that high desert bite to it. A cold that settles into your very bones and doesn't let go till noon. His place sat at the end of a dirt road that ran east from town toward the San Rafael Swell. It was a white clapboard house with a green roof. He had a barn and corrals behind it, open pasture stretching out toward the hills. Beyond the pasture, maybe 2 miles distant, the land rose into a maze of red rock and scrub juniper. The edge of the swell. BLM land that went on for 70 miles in every direction. Most of it never surveyed, never mapped, never touched by anything but wind and weather, and whatever lived out there that didn't want to be found. Harlan was waiting on his porch. He looked older than I remembered, but then I probably did too. He had a leathered look to him, from decades of sun and wind, deep creases around his eyes and mouth. Wade, he shook my hand, his grip as strong as ever. Appreciate you coming. Show me what you've got. We took a mud-caked ATV out across the pasture, following a track worn into the grass by years of use. The cattle were clustered near the eastern fence, maybe 200 head, and they watched us pass with that dull bovine stare that never tells you anything useful. First one was 3 weeks ago, Harlan said over the engine noise. Found her in the lower pasture near the creek. I figured coyotes at first. They'll take a calf if they're hungry enough, and we'd had a dry summer. But then I got a closer look. And? You'll see. We drove for another 10 minutes, past the main herd, through a gate, and into rougher country, where the grass thinned out and gave way to sage and rabbit brush. Ahead I could see a stand of cottonwoods, and beyond that, the first red shoulders of the swell rising against the morning sky. Harlan stopped the ATV near the cottonwoods and cut the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and total. Apparently, the birds and even the insects were absent or did not like it here. I heard only the wind moving through the brush and nothing else. This way. He led me down into the drainage, following a path between the trees. The smell hit me before I saw anything. That copper and rot smell of meat left out. I'd encountered it hundreds of times over my career, and it never got easier to stomach. The cow was lying in a clearing near the creek bed. Or what was left of her, that is. I stopped at the edge of the clearing and made myself study the scene the way I'd been trained to, methodically, section by section. In 31 years with wildlife services, I'd seen every kind of predator kill the American West has to offer. I'd seen wolves take down elk and leave the carcass scattered across a quarter-mile of forest. I'd seen mountain lions cache their kills in trees, coming back night after night to feed. I'd seen bears tear open campsites and coolers and anything else that smelled of food. Every predator has a signature, a way of killing and a way of eating, and you learn to read them if you want to stay in this line of work. This didn't match anything in my experience. This cow had been open from throat to pelvis, in one long incision that curved slightly along the line of the ribcage. The cut was clean, not torn or ragged, but precise enough to suggest a blade rather than teeth or claws. The edges of the hide had been separated and laid flat against the ground on either side of the body, almost as if whoever did this wanted clear access to what was inside. The organs were gone. They weren't scattered about the clearing or dragged off and cached somewhere nearby. They were gone entirely, removed from the body cavity, with what appeared to be deliberate selection. I could see the empty space where the liver should have been, where the heart should have been. The intestines had been pulled out and coiled beside the carcass in a neat pile, untouched, as if whatever did this knew exactly what it wanted, and had no interest in the rest. I crouched down to examine the ribcage. The bones were intact. No gnaw marks or cracking. There was no sign that anything had needed to be broken through to get to the organs. Whatever had taken them had simply reached in and removed them. "You said 3 kills," I said. "Do they all look like this?" "The first 2 are older. Scavengers got to them before I could get anyone out here. But yeah, same basic situation. Opened up clean, organs taken, the rest left behind like garbage." I stood and walked a slow circle around the carcass, studying the ground. The dirt here was soft from recent rain, good for holding tracks. I found boot prints that were probably Harlan's and hoof prints from cattle. I found the small, delicate tracks of a fox or possibly a coyote, something that had investigated but had not fed. But I did find something else. A particular track was pressed into the mud about 6 feet from the carcass. I almost walked past it because my brain kept trying to interpret it as something familiar. A bird track maybe, something from an emu or an ostrich. Except there weren't any emus in Utah and the shape was wrong for either of those anyway. There were 3 toes pointing forward. Long toes, maybe 8 or 9 inches from base to tip, spread wide for balance. The impressions were deep in the mud, suggesting considerable weight behind them. And behind the middle toe, set back about 2 inches and pressed even deeper than the rest, was a curved gouge that didn't fit with any bird I'd ever tracked. A 4th toe, possibly, or some kind of spur, held off the ground at an angle and dragging slightly with each step. I crouched there, staring at that track for a while, running through every possibility I could think of and rejecting each one in turn. "You see what I'm seeing?" Harlan said. He'd come up beside me and was looking down at the same print, his face grim. "I've been ranching this land for 40 years. I've seen every animal track there is to see out here. That's not anything I recognize." "There's got to be an explanation." I tried to sound confident. "There's more. Follow me." We walked along the creek bed, heading upstream toward the swell. The cottonwoods thinned out and the terrain got rougher. Sandstone ledges and dry washes cutting through the red earth. Everything angled and broken and old. Harlan moved carefully, watching where he stepped, and I did the same. The tracks continued upstream. They were spaced about 4 feet apart, following a nearly straight line up the drainage. Bipedal, clearly. Whatever made them was walking on 2 legs rather than 4. The stride was long and steady with no sign of galloping or running, or any change of pace. Whatever this thing was, it had walked out of this canyon after feeding, unhurried, confident. It had no reason to fear anything it might encounter, not even humans. We followed the tracks for maybe a 1/4 mile before Harlan stopped at the mouth of a slot canyon. "I quit here," he said. "Didn't want to go any further without backup." The slot was narrow, maybe 10 feet across at the opening, with red sandstone walls rising 15 or 20 feet on either side. The floor was choked with boulders and debris from old flash floods, and shadows pulled between the rocks, even in the mid-morning light. The tracks led directly into it and disappeared around a bend. "Have you told anyone about this?" I asked. "Anyone besides me?" "Just Maggie Seavey. She's got the spread north of mine. Runs about 300 head up against the swell. Lost more cattle than I have. She's the one who first noticed the tracks and brought them to my attention." "Anyone else?" Harlan shook his head. "Like I said, I wanted it handled quiet, Last thing I need is some reporter getting wind of this and turning my ranch into a tourist attraction. I stood there looking at the slot canyon, at the shadows between the walls, at the tracks vanishing into the dark. The sensible thing to do was to walk away, call Fish and Game, and hand this off to someone with official standing. Let the bureaucracy sort it out. Whatever was living out there in the swell was their problem, not mine. But I'd spent 31 years tracking predators through terrain worse than this. I had dealt with animals that didn't match any field guide, crossbreeds and anomalies, things that should not have existed but did anyway. Whatever made these tracks was just another animal. Strange, yes. Unfamiliar, yeah. But still, an animal. Animals can be tracked. Animals can be understood. Animals follow rules, even when those rules don't match anything you learned in training. I want to talk to Maggie Seavey, I said. And I want to see her kills, if there's anything left to examine, that is. I figured he would. She's expecting us this afternoon. We drove back to Harlan's place and took his truck north along the county road. The land out here was empty, and it's hard to describe to someone who's never seen the interior of Utah. Imagine no houses, no fences, no power lines. Erase all evidence of human presence in your head, beyond maybe some cracked asphalt. Just sage, red rock, and sky, mile after mile, the swell rising to the east in a wall of eroded sandstone that looked like something from a different planet. Maggie Seavey was waiting in her driveway when we pulled up. She was younger than Harlan, maybe mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back from a face that had seen its share of weather and hard seasons. There was something about her expression that I noticed right away. I could have called it guarded exhaustion, like she hadn't slept well in weeks. "So you're Wade," she said when I got out of the truck. "Yes, ma'am." "Harlan says you know what you're doing when it comes to predators." "Well, I've been tracking them most of my adult life. I don't know everything, of course, but I know enough to recognize when I'm looking at something new." She studied me for a moment, taking my measure in silence, and I had the sense of being evaluated by someone who didn't give out her trust cheaply. Whatever conclusion she reached about me, she kept it to herself. "I'll show you what I've got," she said, "but I want something in return." "Name it." "When you figure out what that thing is, you tell me straight. No sugarcoating it, no protecting me from information you think I can't handle. No treating me like some hysterical woman who needs to be managed." Her eyes held mine steadily. "I've lost 8 head in 3 weeks. I've found tracks on my property that don't match anything in any book I own. I've heard sounds at night coming from those canyons, sounds I can't explain, and don't ever want to hear again. Whatever's out there, it's hunting on my land, and I have a right to know what I'm dealing with." "Fair enough, Miss Seavey," I said. "I'll tell you what I find." She nodded once, apparently satisfied, then turned and led us around the side of her house toward the back pasture, where her cattle were grazing. Her kills were older than Harlan's, decomposed enough that scavengers and weather had obscured most of the useful details. But the tracks were there, in the mud, near each carcass. The same 3-toed pattern and curved gouge behind the middle toe, the 4-foot stride and unhurried gait. I photographed everything, measuring the depth and spacing of the prints, sketching the pattern in a notebook I'd brought with me. The data confirmed what I already suspected, but did not want to admit. The tracks came from the swell. They went back to the swell. Whatever was making them had established a territory out there in the maze of canyons and mesas and empty red stone, and it was coming down onto the ranches to feed. "I'm gonna need a few days," I said when we were back at Harlan's place, the sun dropping toward the western hills and the shadows lengthening across the pasture. "I'm gonna want to follow those tracks back to wherever they came from, see if I can locate where this thing is denning. I'll need camping gear, food, and water for at least 3 days, and someone who knows the terrain well enough to keep me from getting lost in the canyons. Harlan and Maggie exchanged a look that carried a whole conversation I wasn't part of. "I'll go with you," Maggie said. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but it's not an offer and it's not up for debate." She cut me off with a sharpness that made it clear she'd been anticipating my objection. "Those tracks crossed my land. This thing killed my animals on my property, and I'm losing my money every day it stays out there. I've been riding these canyons since I was 12. I know the water sources, the game trails. I know where the flash floods come through in monsoon season. You need a guide, I need answers. We can help each other." There was no use debating it. Taking a civilian into rough country to track an unknown predator was not good or standard protocol. But I could see in her face that I wasn't going to change her mind. She made her decision, and she wasn't going to be talked out of it. "All right then, we'll leave at first light. Bring a rifle, and make sure it's something with stopping power. I don't know what we're dealing with yet, but whatever it is, it's big enough to take down a full-grown cow without any sign of a struggle or fear." "I'll be ready." That night I sat in Harlan's kitchen drinking coffee, while he spread a topographic map of the swell across the table. The maze of contour lines showed a landscape folded and broken into 1,000 box canyons and dry washes, most of them unnamed, many of them unmapped below the level of detail the USGS bothered with. The slot canyon where we'd lost the tracks was marked with a small pencil X. "Nobody goes back in there much," Harlan said, tracing a line along one of the deeper canyon systems with his finger. "Used to be some uranium mining in the 50s, back before they knew what the stuff did to you. You can still find the old test shafts if you know where to look. But that terrain's too rough for cattle, too dry for much of anything else. It's empty country." I looked at the map, at all that blank space between the topographic lines, and I thought about the tracks. 4-foot stride, the calmness, the precise and surgical way the cattle had been opened up, organs removed. Whatever was living out there had the whole swell to itself. 70 miles, no roads or trails, no human presence to speak of. It could have stayed hidden forever if it wanted to, but it was coming down onto the ranches, killing cattle within sight of people's homes, leaving tracks that anyone with eyes could follow. This thing had become so unafraid, so comfortable. It was no longer hiding. And that bothered me more than anything else I'd seen that day. We left Harlan's place just after sunrise, the sky banded with orange and pink above the eastern ridgeline. Maggie drove her own truck, and I rode with her, my pack and rifle in the bed alongside her gear. Harlan stood on his porch watching us go, and I could tell from the set of his shoulders that he wanted to come along, but knew better than to ask. Someone had to stay behind and keep an eye on the cattle, and he was too old for the terrain we were heading into anyway. The road turned to dirt after the first few miles, then to something that barely qualified as a track at all. Maggie navigated it without hesitation, steering around washouts and rocks with the casual confidence of someone who'd driven this route 100 times. The swell rose up ahead of us, banded in shades of rust and bone, the layers of sandstone stacked on top of each other like pages in a book that recorded 200 million years of geological history. We parked where the track dead-ended against a wall of rock and continued there on foot. Maggie led the way, following a route that wound between house-sized boulders and up a series of natural ledges into the canyon system above. I stayed close behind her, watching where she put her feet, trying to memorize landmarks in case I needed to find my way back home. The tracks picked up about a mile in, pressed into a patch of dried mud at the bottom of a narrow wash. Same pattern as before, 3 forward-facing toes in the curved gouge in the 4-foot stride. They headed deeper into the canyon, following the wash upstream toward a junction where two larger drainages came together. "This is further than I've gone before," Maggie said, pausing at the junction to drink from her canteen. "The tracks on my property were closer to the ranch. I didn't realize they went back this far." "It's establishing a territory." I crouched to examine a particularly clear point, noting the depth and the angle of the toes. "Coming down to hunt, then retreating back here where no one's going to follow. Smart behavior for a large predator." "What kind of predator moves on two legs?" I didn't have an answer for that, so I didn't say. We kept on moving. The canyon system was a labyrinth. Every few hundred yards, another side drainage would branch off from the main wash, each one twisting away into shadow between high sandstone walls. The track stayed consistent, following what appeared to be a regular route through the maze. I started noticing other signs of passage as we went, like scrapes on the rock where something had brushed against it, or disturbed patches of sand where something heavy had rested, and some strange-looking feathers. They were brown and gray, about 8 inches long, with a structure that reminded me of ostrich plumes. I could not identify the bird they belonged to. Around midday, we found the first cache. The alcove was set into the canyon wall about 15 feet up, accessible by a natural ramp of fallen rock. I smelled it before I saw the entrance, that rotten meat smell I mentioned earlier, but this was concentrated and heavy in the still air. Maggie stopped at the base of the ramp. Her face looked tight. "I'll go up," I said. "You don't need to see this." "Oh yes, I do." She climbed the ramp ahead of me, and I heard her breath catch when she reached the top. By the time I got there and looked into the alcove, she had backed away to the far edge of the ledge and was standing there with her hand pressed over her mouth. The alcove was maybe 30 feet deep and 10 feet high, carved into sandstone by centuries of wind and water. The ceiling was stained dark with old moisture, and the floor was covered in a layer of sand that had blown in over the years. Filling that space, arranged with a precision that made my stomach turn, were the remains of cattle. Pieces of cattle, to be more accurate. Hindquarters, rib cages, skulls, dozens of them, wedged into cracks in the rock and piled on natural shelves along the walls. Some were fresh enough that flies still crawled on the exposed meat. Others had mummified in the dry desert air. The flesh turned to leather, the bones bleached pale by time. The oldest ones looked like they had been there for years. I made myself step inside and examine the arrangement. The fresher pieces were stored higher up, jammed into crevices near the ceiling where they'd be harder for scavengers to catch. The older remains had been pushed toward the back and sides, making room for new additions. Everything faced outward, eye sockets pointing toward the entrance, and I realized with a crawling sensation along my spine that the skulls had been deliberately positioned that way. Arranged. Displayed. This was not a food cache. It was something else. Something that implied a level of intention I did not want to think about. "How many?" Maggie's voice came from behind me, barely above a whisper. I counted skulls. Gave up after 30. A lot. From multiple ranches, probably. Some of these have been here for years. Nobody reported this many missing. Not that I ever heard about. Range cattle go missing all the time. Drought, disease, getting stuck in a wash during a flash flood. You don't always find the bodies. I backed out of the alcove, suddenly desperate to be back in open air. This thing has been hunting here for a while, building up a supply. Maggie was staring at the entrance, her face pale beneath her tan. Why would it store them like that? Wolves don't do that. Mountain lions don't do that. I don't know. You just keep saying that. Because it's true, Maggie. I started down the ramp, moving faster than I should have on that loose rock. Let's keep moving. I want to find where it's bedding down. We pressed on through the afternoon, following the tracks deeper into the canyon system. The terrain got rougher as we went, more climbing and more scrambling over boulder fields, and more sections where we had to lower our packs on rope, then climb down after them. Maggie kept up without complaint, though I could see the discovery of that cache had shaken her in a way that the dead cattle on her ranch had not. There's a difference, I suppose, between finding an animal that's been killed and finding evidence of something that plans ahead, that stockpiles, and arranges skulls of its prey in neat rows facing the entrance, like a hunter mounting trophies to a wall. By late afternoon, the canyon we were following opened up into a wider valley, maybe a quarter-mile across, with a dry creek bed running down the center, and stands of cottonwood growing along the banks. The tracks led across the valley floor and disappeared into another slot canyon on the far side. "We should camp here," Maggie said, surveying the valley with a practiced eye. "There's water if we dig for it, and we'll have better sightlines than anywhere else we've been. I don't want to be boxed in when it gets dark." I agreed. We set up our tents near the creek bed, about 50 yards from the canyon wall, with clear views in every direction. Maggie dug a seep hole while I gathered dead cottonwood branches for a fire. By the time the sun dropped behind the western rim of the valley, we had water filtering through a bandana and a small fire crackling between us. We ate dinner in near silence, both of us watching the shadows lengthen across the valley floor. The entrance to the far canyon was a dark slash in the red rock, and I found my eyes returning to it every few minutes, expecting to see movement, dreading what that movement might look like. "My husband would have loved this," Maggie said, breaking the silence. "The mystery of it, I mean. He was always reading about cryptids and unexplained sightings, Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and all that. Used to drive me crazy, to be honest, the books he'd bring home." "Used to?" "Heart attack 3 years ago. Went out to check the fence. Dropped dead before he hit the ground." She poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a spiral of sparks. "The doctors said it was quick, that he probably didn't feel anything. I don't know if that's supposed to make a person feel better." "Didn't know you were married, or used to be, till just now. I'm sorry to hear that, Maggie." "Don't be, it's not your fault, and I've had time to make my peace with it." She looked up at me from across the fire, her face half in shadow. "I just keep thinking about what he'd say if he could see those tracks, if he could have seen what we found in that alcove. He spent his whole life wanting proof that there was something out there that science couldn't explain. And here I am, looking at it. And all I want is for it to be a wolf or a bear or something with a name I can put in a report." I understood what she meant. There's comfort in the known, even when the known is dangerous. A wolf you can track and trap and kill. A mountain lion you can tree with dogs. But this thing, whatever it was, didn't fit into any category I had a protocol for. It was new, and new is terrifying in ways that familiar danger can never be. We let the fire burn down to coals and turned in early. I lay in my tent with my rifle beside me, listening to the sounds of the desert settling into night. Wind moved through the cottonwoods, and somewhere out in the flats a coyote called to its pack. At some point I must have fallen asleep. I don't remember when, because the next thing I knew I was awake, and the world outside my tent had fallen silent in the most unnatural way. Even the wind had stopped, and the coyotes were now absent. Hell, I didn't even hear rocks settling. The silence was so full that I could hear my own heartbeat thudding against my ribs. And then I heard breathing. It came from right outside my tent, maybe 2 feet from where I lay. Heavy breathing, with a faint clicking undertone that I couldn't identify. Something large, something alive, was standing directly over me. My every instinct screamed at me to grab my rifle, to move, to do something. Instead, I lay absolutely still, my eyes cracked open just enough to see through my lashes, my body rigid under the thin fabric of my sleeping bag. Some deep, primal part of my brain was telling me that movement now meant death, and that my only chance was to play dead, hoping this thing would lose interest. The breathing continued. I heard something shift on the ground outside, the soft scrape of weight settling into sand, and through the mesh panel at the foot of my tent, I saw it. Not all of it, but just the foot. It was less than a foot away from the mesh, close enough that I could see every detail in the faint moonlight filtering through the fabric. 3 toes, each as long as my forearm, and tipped with a curved claw. The skin was scaled, pale gray and brown in a mottled pattern, with a texture that reminded me of the belly of a snake. And behind the middle toe, raised off the ground at an angle, was the 4th claw, the one that left the curved gouge in the tracks I'd been following. It was enormous, 10 inches long at least, curved like a sickle, the edge gleaming faintly where moonlight caught it. It was held off the ground deliberately, retracted until needed, and I understood in that moment that this was a weapon, a killing tool. One swing of that claw would open a man from throat to pelvis, the same way those cattle had been opened up, and there would not be anything he could do to stop it. The foot shifted. I watched the claws flex against the sand, the tendons moving beneath the scaled skin, and I had to bite down on the inside of my cheek to keep from making a sound. The breathing above me changed pitch, became something almost contemplative, and I felt so sure then that it knew I was awake, that it was standing over me, looking down at me, deciding whether I was worth killing. The moment stretched on, seconds that felt like hours. My lungs burned because I'd forgotten to breathe. My entire body was locked in a paralysis I couldn't have broken if I'd tried. Then the foot moved. One step, then another, the stride bringing it over to Maggie's tent. I heard it stop there, and I heard the breathing continue, that same clicking sound coming from it, as it examined her the way it had examined me. I wanted to shout a warning. I wanted to grab my rifle and do something, but my body refused to obey. I lay there in the dark, completely helpless, listening to that thing standing over Maggie Seavey while she slept. After what felt like forever, the breathing moved away. I heard footsteps, that 4-foot stride I'd been tracking for days, heading toward the far end of the valley. The sound faded into the distance, and gradually, minute by minute, the normal sounds of the desert were brave enough to return. The wind in the cottonwoods, the coyotes calling somewhere far away, the creaks of the cooling rocks. I didn't move, not until dawn. I lay there with my eyes open, watching the mesh panel at the foot of my tent, waiting for that foot to reappear. When the sun finally came up, I crawled out of my tent on shaking legs and looked at the ground where I'd seen it standing. The tracks were there. 3 toes forward, curved gouge behind. They circled my tent twice, then moved on to Maggie's tent, circling hers 3 times. After that, they headed toward the far canyon and disappeared into shadow. Maggie emerged from her tent a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She saw me standing there looking at the tracks, and her face went still. "It was here," she said. "Last night, it was here, right here, Yeah. I heard it. I thought I was dreaming, but I heard something outside. Breathing. She wrapped her arms around herself despite the warmth of the morning sun. Why didn't it kill us? I thought about that foot inches from my face, and the killing claw raised and ready, the deliberate way it had circled our tents, examining us. I don't know, I said. Maybe it wasn't hungry. Maybe it was just curious. Or maybe... I stopped, not wanting to finish the thought. Maybe what? Maybe it's smart enough to know that killing us would bring more attention to it. Searchers, helicopters. It's been living out here undetected for years, picking off range cattle that no one's going to miss. 2 dead hikers would change things, would bring attention it doesn't want. Maggie stared at me. You're saying it made a decision, that it chose not to kill us? I'm saying, Maggie, I don't know what I'm dealing with anymore. We broke camp in silence. I wanted to go home, to pack up and hike out. I could live the rest of my days just fine, pretending I'd never seen those tracks or that alcove of bones. But the tracks leading toward the far canyon were fresh, and I knew that if I left now, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what was back there, what I'd almost seen in the dark. Maggie did not object when I told her I was going to keep following the tracks. She simply put on her pack and fell in behind me, and together we headed toward the slot canyon on the far side of the valley. We'd been hiking for maybe an hour when she stopped to refill her canteen at a seep spring trickling out on the rock. I went ahead to scout the next section of the route, and when I came back 20 minutes later, Maggie was standing at the edge of the spring with her back to me, perfectly still. Maggie? She didn't answer, didn't turn around, just stood there with her shoulders hunched and her hands hanging at her sides. Something was wrong. I walked around to face her and saw that she'd been crying. Her cheeks were wet and her eyes red-rimmed. Her expression was blank and distant, like a part of her had gone somewhere far away and had not yet come back. Maggie, what happened? Eventually, she shook her head, but she would not meet my eyes. Maggie, talk to me. What happened while I was gone? Nothing. Her voice was flat, drained of all emotion. I'm fine. Let's keep moving. She pushed past me and started up the trail. I watched her go, noticing for the first time the way she was holding herself, stiffly and carefully, as if something hurt that she didn't want me to know about. And on the back of her shirt, just visible beneath the straps of her pack, I saw 3 dark lines soaking through the fabric. I didn't ask again. Whatever had happened at that spring, she wasn't ready to tell me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know. We hiked the rest of the morning in silence, following the tracks deeper into the swell. I tried not to think about the thing that had stood over me in the dark, the breathing, the deciding. And I tried to not think about what happened to Maggie while I scouted ahead, but I think it came back. It did something to her, and it let her live. The slot canyon on the far side of the valley was narrower than any we'd passed through yet. The walls rose 40 feet on either side, close enough in places that I could touch both of them at once, and the floor was choked with debris from flash floods that had roared through here over the centuries. We moved single file, Maggie in front, picking our way over boulders and around pools of stagnant water that smelled of algae and decay. The tracks continued through the slot, pressed into patches of sand between the rocks. They were fresher here than anywhere else we'd seen them. Hours old, maybe less. Whatever we were following had come this way recently, and of course it had not been in a hurry. After maybe half a mile, the slot began to widen. The walls pulled back, the ceiling of sky above us grew broader, and I could see light ahead where the canyon opened into something larger. Maggie slowed her pace, and I moved up beside her as we approached the exit. The slot opened into an amphitheater. That's the only word for it. A natural bowl carved into the red rock, about 200 feet across, with walls that curved up and around like the inside of a skull. The floor was covered in fine sand, pale and smooth, unmarked except for a single set of tracks that crossed from the slot where we stood to a dark opening on the far side. Afternoon sunlight poured down from above, filling the space with a warm golden glow that made the red sandstone seem to pulse with inner fire. It was beautiful. It was also, I realized immediately, a perfect killing ground. One way in, one way out, with walls too steep to climb and nowhere to hide if something decided it didn't want you to leave. "We should go back," Maggie said, basically in a whisper. I agreed with her. Every instinct I had was telling me that we should turn around, retreat through the slot canyon, and get back to open ground where we'd have room to run. But the tracks crossed the amphitheater floor and disappeared into that dark opening on the far side, and I knew that if I left now, I would never have another chance to see what made them. The ranchers would go back to losing cattle. The state would send someone eventually. Someone who didn't know the terrain, who might blunder around for a few days, then file a report that blamed the losses on mountain lions or feral dogs. And this thing, it would keep hunting, keep killing, keep living out here in the canyons where nobody would ever find it. "Wait here," I said. "I'm going to take a closer look at that opening." "Wade, if anything happens, you run. Go back through that slot, and you don't stop until you reach the trucks. You tell Harlan what we found, and you make sure someone comes back here with enough firepower to deal with whatever's living in these canyons." She nodded once after several seconds, then stepped back into the shadow of the slot entrance, her rifle held across her chest. I walked out into the amphitheater. The sand was soft under my boots, muffling my footsteps. I kept my rifle up, tracking the barrel across the walls, watching for movement in the shadows. The dark opening on the far side grew larger as I approached, resolving into another slot canyon that twisted away into blackness. The tracks led directly into it. I was maybe 20 feet from the entrance when I heard a sound. It came from behind me, a soft scrape of sand, the whisper of something moving, and then a low rumbling trill that I felt in my chest more than I heard in my ears. The same sound I'd heard outside my tent the night before, that clicking, contemplative noise that had made my blood freeze. I turned around. It was standing at the mouth of the slot we'd come through, blocking the only exit. It was standing between me and Maggie, though I couldn't see her anymore in the shadows behind it. My brain tried to reject what my eyes were showing me, tried to turn it into something familiar, but there was nothing in my 31 years of experience that matched the creature standing 40 feet away from me in that bowl of redstone. It was tall, 9 feet at least, maybe closer to 10, standing upright on 2 powerful legs with backward bending knees. The body was lean and muscular, covered in a coat of feathers that ranged from dark brown along the back to a mottled gray and white on the chest and belly. The feathers lay flat and smooth, giving it a sleek appearance, almost elegant, except for the ridge of longer plumes that ran down the back of the neck and spine like a mane. The arms were short compared to the legs, but they weren't vestigial. They ended in 3-fingered hands tipped with curved claws, and as I watched, those hands flexed and opened, the fingers spreading wide in a gesture that looked almost like a greeting. The tail extended behind it, thick and rigid, held off the ground for balance. And the head, it was shaped like a bird's, narrow and elongated, with a long snout that ended in a hooked beak. But the eyes that looked out from either side of that skull were not bird's eyes. They were golden, with horizontal pupils, more like a goat's, and they held intelligence in them, and that made my stomach clench. This was no animal looking at me. This was something that thought, that reasoned, and that was studying me with the same careful attention I'd given the tracks and its kills and the cache of bones in that alcove. It knew what I was. It understood what I was doing here, and it was waiting to see what I would do next. I raised my rifle. The creature did not react. It just stood there, watching me, the massive head tilting slightly to one side, in an expression that might have been curiosity, or perhaps amusement. "Maggie!" I called out, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "Maggie! Can you hear me?" No answer. The creature's bulk filled the slot entrance. I could hardly see past it, into the shadows where she'd been standing. I had no idea if she was even alive. The creature made that trilling sound again, low and resonant. Then, it took a step forward. I watched the killing claws flex as it moved. They were even larger than they'd looked through the mesh of my tent. Curved and sickle-like, made of bone, held off the ground with each step, settling back as the foot came down. The movement was so fluid and natural, the gait of something that had been walking on two legs for millions of years before anything resembling a human existed. It took another step, and another, closing the distance between us with that unhurried stride I'd been tracking for 3 days. I could have fired. I should have fired. My finger was on the trigger, the sights lined up on the center of that feathered chest. But something held me back, a realization that was more subconscious than conscious. What I knew was that it was not attacking, it was approaching. And these bullets, I had no idea if they would work, or if they would just piss it off. The creature stopped about 10 feet away from me, close enough that I could see the texture of those feathers, and the way the light caught the iridescence in the darker plumes along its back. And it was close enough now that I could smell it. And it smelled exactly like its kill sites, of metallic blood and rot. It lowered its head until those golden eyes were level with mine. The beak was close enough to touch, so close I could see the serrated edge along the inner surface, designed for gripping and tearing. A drop of something wet glistened at the corner of its mouth. We looked at each other. Then it made a sound. It wasn't the trill this time, something different. A series of clicks and whistles, rising and falling in a pattern that almost sounded like language. It was like it was trying to tell me something, and I could tell it was expecting me to understand. But I didn't understand. I stood there with my rifle raised and my heart racing. I was trying to fit this impossible creature into some normal framework of my world, but I couldn't. Then the clicking stopped, and the creature tilted its head again, and I could have sworn I saw something like disappointment in those golden eyes. It then straightened up, turned away from me, and walked toward the dark opening on the far side of the amphitheater. It paused at the entrance, looking back at me over its shoulder. It made one more sound, a single low note that shook in the very stone walls around us. Then it was gone, disappearing into the dark, and I was alone in the amphitheater with the afternoon sun beating down on my shoulders, my legs trembling so bad, my bladder nearly emptied itself. Maggie was waiting in the slot when I made my way back to the entrance. She was quiet, eyes wide, and I could tell from her expression that she had encountered it too. She probably saw it walk past her in the narrow canyon, close enough to touch as well, only for it to keep going without so much as a glance in her direction. We looked at each other and didn't speak. We turned and walked back through the slot canyon, across the valley, through the labyrinth of drainages and washes, until we made it back to the truck. By then, the sun was setting behind the western rim of the swell. Maggie drove me to Harlan's. When we got there, I exited without a word, and she didn't speak at all. I took a couple steps back and watched as she drove away. Harlan was waiting on the porch when I pulled up, same place he'd been when I first arrived a few days earlier. He took one look at my face and didn't ask any questions, but he did hand me a glass of whiskey and sat down in the chair beside me, waiting for me to talk. After one long exhale, I told him what we'd found: the cache, tracks, the creature in the amphitheater. I told him everything except what had happened to Maggie at the spring, because that wasn't my story to tell, and I didn't even know everything about it. When I was done, Harlan sat there with quite the look on his face. Then he stared out into the darkening fields and said, "What do we do now?" "I don't know, Harlan." I took a big drink of the whiskey. It burned going down, but felt good. "We could report it, call Fish and Game, tell them what we saw. I know they won't believe us, but they'll send someone out here, and that someone will find tracks that they can't explain, and kills that they can't attribute to any known predator. Unfortunately, they'll probably write it up to unusual mountain lion activity and close the case. And the thing stays out there." Yes, the thing stays out there. I looked at him. "It's been here for years, Harlan. Maybe longer. That cache had bones in it that looked decades old. Whatever this is, it's not new. It's just been careful, taking some cattle here and there, staying in the canyons where nobody goes. Until now. Until now." We sat together on that porch until the stars came out, drinking whiskey and watching the swell turn black against the sky. I left Harlan's place the next morning. I drove back to Grand Junction, and I told myself I was done with it. I'd done what I could, and the rest was someone else's problem. I got back to my quiet retirement, my empty house, my life that suddenly felt very small and very fragile. But the event would not leave my mind, because there was one thing that I kept to myself. The bedding site we'd passed on the second day, before we found the cache. There was a shallow depression in the sand where something large had rested, surrounded by scattered debris that I'd stepped over without really looking at it. But later on, it clicked. These were pale white fragments, about a quarter-inch thick. They'd been scattered in rough circles around the depression. 3 circles, now that I thought about it. 3 separate clusters of broken eggs. To be truthful, that story was really creepy for me. I've never seen or heard the whole "raptors are extremely smart" aspect played up so much, despite movies and television telling us about it, but never truly showing the extent. And from the stories I've been sent, I've never felt such helplessness for the narrator and characters involved. Because against that creature in the canyons, they stayed alive merely from its good graces. Good night. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find me on X at Dark Prevails, on YouTube as Darkness Prevails, and if you're in the mood for more scary narrations from me, check out my other shows, Tales from the Break Room and Alone in the Woods. If you'd rather sit back and relax to just me chatting with friends, check out Night Watchers instead. All of these shows can be found, followed, and rated on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you all so much for being here to get scared with me. Until next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.